Welcome, friends, to day 2 of a new coffee industry, a Mapper Forward presentation over 3 days. Today's presentation is focused on roasting, and the presentation title is RoR, the reality of roasting in the era of COVID. Our fabulous presenter today is a dear friend of mine and an esteemed colleague, Anne Cooper from Equilibrium Roasters, and is going to be presenting in 3 sections today. We're going to start with a 1-hour presentation. Then we're going to move on to a Q&A in the second hour. We're going to take a short 10-minute break. And then in the third hour, we're going to be joined by Stephen Green from Mill City Roasters. And Stephen is going to engage in a Q&A of sorts with Anne, where we're going to be talking about the article and the research that Anne has done with Rob Hughes that was released in Roast magazine recently, and that is Can You Taste the Roasting System? So we've got a fabulous 3 hours ahead of us. And so without further ado, I introduce my friend and esteemed colleague, Anne Cooper.
Hi, everybody. So again, a very big thank you to Lee. Also, before I sort of get into thanking Lee and Map It Forward, just wanted to say a very big thank you to Mill City Roasters as a sponsor for this particular section of the event. But back to Lee and Map It Forward. A massive thank you for your support, and I guess in the spirit of Map It Forward, thank you for conspiring to my success, because essentially, as a coffee roasting consultant, it's my job to also do that for you guys, in the roasting community. So as Lee touched on, with the structure of the sessions today, there'll be three parts to today. So the first part is talking about in terms of, the reality of roasting, and sort of looking at what COVID has thrown to us as an industry, because it's really identified and highlighted a lot about our industry in terms of processes, procedures. It's highlighting our business models, our target market. Now, having to shift our target market all of a sudden from wholesale to retail has also really helped to sort of highlight potentially our roasting style and our profiles. So as a consultant, I get asked quite a lot and about roasting profiles. And I just forgot a bit of information about myself. I'm going to put this slide up at the end as well, with a link to my website and articles that I've written, and also to a mastermind group that we'll be setting up as well after this session. But essentially, what COVID is highlighting for us is it's really putting us on our toes in terms of how do I know how to start? How do I know how to finish? But why? It's bringing up all those questions about how do I know I've made the right decision? Because we're always thirsty for direction. We're always looking for information on how to get the best out of our profiles, and basically, what to do. Now, also recognising, and a big hello to everybody watching, and thank you for taking the time to tune in. And then if you are tuning in later on YouTube to watch, recognising the range of experience in the group that's watching in terms of, we've got those that are new to the industry, looking for, best ways on how to get started and what to do. And then our experienced roasters that are looking to improve and to better understand, their way. But ultimately, we've always got to remember that roasting is a skill. It takes time to learn. And things that I wish I, was shown when I first stepped up to the roaster was the whys and the answers behind those decision points. So I thought for this session, it would be a really great chance to just chat through a roast curve. So when I did my production roasting on Monday this week, I just recorded one of my roast profiles. So essentially what we're going to do is have a bit of a chat about the lead up and the things that we need to consider before we start that profile and roasting, and then I'm going to stop and start the video and talk about my decision points. why did I start with a certain temperature? Why did I turn the gas up? Why did I turn the gas down? Just chat through all of the decision points throughout the roast, and hopefully it can really help you guys in terms of better understanding your own roasting approach and make, better, clearer decisions with your roasting. So initially, and then, definitely it's really looking forward to then the Q&A where we can dig in more into the COVID stuff. And then at the end, chatting with Steve from Mill City, where we can really geek out a little bit more on roasting stuff. But the idea with this session is to just approach it from a really practical perspective. What is it that we're really dealing with when we're going through our roasting? But initially, it's important to recognise when we first get into roasting, there is that little bit of romance. I like to call it, this is a really beautiful picture, but it's like an iceberg. There's a hell of a lot going on, underneath that picture. So yes, there's a beautiful picture of, smelling the roast, but there's a lot of, thinking, there's a lot of calculating, there's a lot going on. So essentially, beyond that romance of roasting, there is that reality. And I just wanted to put this up just, for a bit of fun. Into it's hot, it's dry, you make amazing mistakes, you drop green onto brown, it's dirty, it's dusty, here I am getting ready to crawl underneath a cooling tray to vacuum and clean it out. You're faced with, this, line of buckets ready to roast. The effort required to scoop out that coffee is incredibly hard. Then you burn your lip because you're not concentrating, and then so there's a lot going on. It's physically and mentally exhausting. And then one thing I found this video when I was doing a big production session, a lot of us are finding we're roasting a lot of volume at the moment on small machines. And so this was basically, or essentially, a ton of coffee on a very small roaster. So this is where we're finding ourselves at the moment in terms of the reality of you're on your feet for a long time. It's a lot of hard work. But the thing is, we love it because it's creative. We're, satisfying. It's an instant results, kind of industry. And we're basically creating very tasty, damn delicious things with our roasting. But it's when it doesn't work is when it becomes a little bit unnerving. So again, I really want to approach this from a practical perspective, try and be more solution based and recommending best practices. So when we start to go through the roast curve, I want to make sure that it's not me saying you have to do it this way. It's me showing you what would I do, how do I make decisions as we're chatting through that roast curve. And then why am I focusing on specific data in a certain way? Okay, so in the lead up to looking at the roast curve, again, just great pictures, but be organized. So one thing that this highlights in terms of understanding how much coffee do you need to roast, how many tubs of green do you need to scoop out, where is that roasted coffee going to go? So are you doing a post blend or a pre blend? How are you going to start laying out that roasted coffee? How are you going to blend it? Are you again, post blend, pre blend, there's no right or wrong. And these are the kinds of things that we can touch on in the mastermind groups. This is just really highlighting how many times do you want to touch the coffee before it gets into either a wholesale tin or a retail bag. So be organized is really, really super important. And I think this is also one thing, in terms of COVID and this kind of organizing, it also highlights the fact that if we're having to work alone, it's also highlighting the fact that you're having to then also consider you're doing everything as the roaster. You're scooping out the green, you've got to pick it up to roast it, you've got to pick it up to then pack it. So it's really highlighting, again, procedures and processes and protocols working in the roastery alone during COVID. And then so a lot of you may have seen this particular slide from the heat transfer class through SCA, but just getting to know your system is really essential in terms of understanding, everything from your airflow to, your type of, controls, your burner types, your cooling tray design, your drum, your probes, which we're going to touch on in a moment. So for me, essentially, this is the roaster that I used on Monday to roast the roast curve. So it's a Probertoni P12 Series 2. Her name is Georgie, so it's super important to name your roaster. Have an electronic control panel, so you can see here in terms of the adjustments. You're just tapping the percentages here, and then in 10% increments, and then the finer increments are here for your 1% plus and minus. It's a premix power burner on natural gas. It has a cast iron face plate, not the drum. So definitely there is no such thing as a cast iron drum. It will always be things like the face plate, the door, and sometimes the back of the roaster. And on older machines, it'll be in this higher part of the roaster here as well. It has a double wall solid mild steel drum. The drum spins anti-clockwise. And it has a fixed RPM and airflow, which is adjusted by a baffle at the back. It has a temperature high cutout at 250 and a 3mm K-type probe, default and post install. So on the temperature high cutout, in terms of here on the control panel, you see this number here, 222. Over here, you see the number 223. So this 222 is actually coming from the default probe that was installed with the roaster. And the probe itself is actually sticking out just about this way into the drum. This number here, the 223, is coming from this 3mm probe installed lower in the door. So it's really important to understand that when full heat is applied during a roast, at the beginning of the roast, these two values will pull apart quite significantly. So choosing which number to focus on, which probe to focus on, is super important. And also in terms of the temperature high cutout, if you're focusing on this probe here on the screen from the software, what will happen, because the default probe is higher in the drum, another thing that COVID has highlighted is batch size. Really quick story, one of the companies I was roasting for, when COVID hit, they said, how can you roast as much coffee as possible in a small amount of time? So I was like, well, that would mean potentially increasing the batch size. Now, on a roaster like this ProBat, the cutout temperature is 250. Now, to start a really big batch size, you do need to start with a fairly high temperature. So being aware that there is that significant difference between these two probes, just being really mindful, exploring your high and your low set points on your roaster is really important. Now, the probe, why is it important to know about the probe? I need to know that I've got a 3mm K-type probe, because it's going to make me aware of the kind of values that I'm working with. If you're used to working with another machine and it has a thicker probe and it's potentially positioned higher in the drum, but if it is in the same position in the door but it's thicker, your values or your numbers will be different. So the numbers will be reading a lot lower and a lot slower with a thicker probe, whereas with a 3mm, it's going to be a lot thinner and a lot faster. So I just keep that in mind, knowing the values that I'm going to be working with. So in terms of the probe, then it's also then helping me understand those values. So when you get a roaster, one of the best things you can do when you're seasoning is to use that seasoning process to understand the values. So yes, not only are you seasoning the drum, but you're also understanding, you want to start assigning physical events to a particular temperature. So straight away, I just want to say, don't ever let anybody tell you that looking at the physical events in a roast is an old school technique. it's one of the best techniques that you can use while you're roasting. You need the feedback from the beans in the roaster so that you know how to start assigning the data to that physical event that's going on in the roaster. So then you get a feel for, when do I look at the beans? When do I look at my data? How do I then make a decision about how I'm going to drive this roast and these beans from event to event? And then based on past experience and tasting and analysing past profiles, you then start understanding the time at which you want these events to happen. So essentially, once you understand and start connecting your probe to a physical event, you then just need to learn how to drive your roaster, and you're adjusting your machine to get from event to event. And that's where trial and error no doubt comes into play in roasting. So that's the first part of like getting to know our machine, and now getting to know your green. Definitely analyze and know everything about your green before roasting. It's really important to know the moisture content, the water activity, the density, and the screen size. So the day we had a Brazil, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. The roast curve that we're going to watch is the El Salvador. Now, the reason for doing these measurements is also because it gives me an idea about potentially what temperature to start roasting at. Now, I always use the moisture content as my indicator on how to start a roast. Water acts as a catalyst. How much energy do I need to apply to that bean with a particular level of moisture that's present? This is the bound moisture in the bean. So if you have a bean that's at 10.7% moisture versus a bean that's 9.2%, there's no way that you're going to use the same approach to start the roast for those, two different beans. So really knowing that moisture content is a really great way to start getting to know how to start your roast. Also in line then with the batch size, the screen size of the bean. And then I use information about the density value. So down here you'll see these are measured in grams per litre. I'm also a big fan of using the density tube for my density measurements as well. But knowing how hard the coffee is something that I use more towards going through first crack, which we're going to talk about with the roast curve. So really understanding your green is really, really important. And it also helps in terms of then planning your roasting schedule. So you can see here I've outlaid starting with the Brazil first, moving on to the El Salvador, and then moving on to the Costa Rica. So I'm starting with the lower moisture, softer beans first, and then moving through to my higher moisture, higher density coffees. So for those of you that have then also said to yourselves, I'll always start my roast with decaf. Probably because decaf is actually the best bean to use, because it actually generally has a low moisture, and it's generally a low in density measurement as well. So if you haven't taken the time to measure your decaf and better understand it from those values, instead of just going, oh, well, I was just told to do decaf first, actually understand why it's actually best to do it first from that perspective. Understanding your roasting room conditions. So it's really important that you track in terms of now we're down here in Melbourne, we're going through moving into winter. So the temperatures are starting to get colder, and it's starting to get drier in the roastery, where in summer, it's generally very hot and very humid. So knowing what's going on with your general temperature and humidity is also going to help you better understand how to start approaching your roasting based on the roasting room conditions. Your roasting room conditions will also affect the temperature of your green. So it's definitely heading into winter. If your green is a lot colder, then you will have to start making adjustments to your starting temperatures as well. Now in terms of backing yourself up with appropriate data. So we've set ourselves up with our roast log sheet. So we're getting ready to roast. Now, this is a set of roasting parameters that I created in response to how to start knowing how to end a roast. Now, along with doing color measurements, knowing our probe. So this data, again, created with a 3mm probe, it's about helping us understand, how do I think my way through the end of a roast, and how do I define that data based on tasting and trial and error. So I've highlighted the roast that we're going to be focusing on in terms of parameters is, I'm going to be doing a milk-based espresso roast. I really like the term in terms of, it's like a sugar dark, kind of roast level. It's not roasty, but it's very full-bodied and sweet and very balanced. So I want to make sure that I'm doing that throughout my roast. So the data that I'm focusing on, I've mapped out what time I want to move through from green to yellow and to first crack. I'm mapping out my desired timing for my stages. I'm also going through my desired weight loss percentage, my development ratio percentages. Now, this stretch degrees is how many degrees, using my 3mm probe, do I want to be moving from first crack to the end of the roast? Because those stretch degrees is also still rise rate. And I still want to be controlling the roaster to be able to achieve that amount of degrees, because then I know it's also going to be matching a particular roast color that I'm after as well. So if in the event that you don't have a roast color analyzer, based on your own sensory analysis and eyeing off the color, you can also better define the end of your roast by using these stretch times and degrees to really help you then take yourself out through the roast, which will really make a lot more sense once we start chatting through the curve. So definitely plan ahead. Make sure you've got a clear idea about what you want to achieve in the roast. So just before we go to the curve, what is measured during a roast? So just reminding ourselves, we're measuring the charge and the drop temperature, the bean temperature, the rate of temperature change, or what we also refer to as the rate of rise. So that rate of temperature change is like the speedo. How fast, how slow are we going in the roast? Our air or our exhaust temperature. It's really important that we're connected with our exhaust, because our exhaust is like, I like to say it's like money in the bank, or it's like, gas or petrol in our tank in our car. How much energy do I have in my system to be able to drive myself through the roast? And it's very responsive to our gas adjustments as well. So our heat application, our turnaround point, our color change points, first crack, second crack, and potentially other system control changes that are relevant to your system as well. So again, the aim of chatting through this profile and this curve is, what am I focusing on when I'm roasting? And using what we have available. We have the software and we have the feedback from our probe, and then understanding how to adjust our machine accordingly. So the idea of going through this curve is, it's not to copy. And again, it's not me telling you have to do it this way. It's more about, how can you use this approach of me chatting through what I'm doing to go back and analyze your own roasting, so you can then strip it back in terms of, and really see how things are being affected, and what's giving you a particular flavor. What are you using as your decision points while you're roasting? So this is very much more like a nuts and bolts approach, the reality of what we're thinking about in order to get to the end result. Alrighty. So now we sort of know a little bit about the roaster that we're using, the green that we're roasting, and I'm doing a milk-based espresso blend. So I've also got an idea about the parameters that I want to hit. So I'm doing a 10-kilo batch of coffee in a 12-kilo size rated roaster, 3mm probe. Now, as you saw, if you remember back on the roast log sheet, for the El Salvador, I have a desired starting bean temperature of 225. Now, at the moment, here you can see I'm idling the roaster as close as possible to that starting temperature. So it's super important that before you start a roast, And when you're scooping out your green and you're getting ready to roast, you're also preheating and idling your roaster appropriately, ready to start. There really is no excuse for your first roast to be a complete disaster if you've preheated and you're idling your roaster appropriately. Now, so I have my roaster already set at that temperature. So I've got it's been preheating for probably about 45 minutes, and it's at a point where now I'm at that 225-ish bean temperature on about a 10% gas. Now, what happens because of my probe position on my roaster in the door, what happens is when I start preheating a little bit too long, the bean temperature starts to get hotter than the exhaust temperature here. So when we go to start this roast, I am going to just flush the heat out a little bit down to 200 degrees. And I'm going to be doing that with the 10% gas. And then as soon as I close the door and you see the temperature ramping up, I'm going to be going to a 40% burner level. I'm going to charge and drop the beans in at 225. We are going to sit back on 10% gas for about 30 seconds, and then I'm going to start chatting through my decision points. But already I'm letting you know in terms of my first decision to start this roast is idling the machine properly and getting ready to start then to really frame this roast up for success. Okay, let's go. So as soon as I hit start, now just going to have, so now you can see the temperature going down to 200. That's me flushing out a bit of heat. Now I'm going to close the door. I'm now sitting on 40% gas, and I'm going to ramp up the bean temperature to 225. I'm also looking for, just going to stop briefly, I'm also making sure that now my exhaust temperature is going to start pulling away from my bean, and I'm going to be looking for at least a 15 to 20 degree difference between the bean temperature and the exhaust before I start dropping in. So when it gets to 225 on the bean temperature, then we'll start the roast. So dropping in. So I had about a 15 degree difference between the bean and the exhaust. So I'm just making a note that I'm starting on 10% gas. Okay. Now, just going to stop for a moment. Back when I was talking about getting to know the roaster, and I put up the color change of the beans and getting to know the desired temperatures, one thing that I did forget to mention, which I will mention now, is the one thing I want to do with this roaster is, as the beans are dropping in, I've quickly learned that I do not want to drop below 70 degrees on the turning point. Now, it's really important, and I do hear, certain theories about people saying, don't worry about, the turning point. It doesn't mean anything. Turning points are just a great indicator. So the reality is, regardless of what people are saying about, whether it's, how probes read, you can really use your turning point temperature as a way to really help you understand, did I start with the right temperature? Did I start with the right gas setting? Did I introduce heat at the right time for that particular batch size and that particular bean with a specific screen size and a specific moisture content? How am I framing myself up for success in the first part of this roast? Because the first part of the roast is all about preparation and momentum. And then the fun starts after that phase there. So let's go back to watching the turning point. So we've started our roast. We're sitting on 10% gas. Now at 30 seconds, I'm going to turn the gas up to 100%. So we'll see here. 30 seconds is coming, going to 100%. Now, you'll also notice that the bean temperature is still falling. Now, the idea with introducing high heat with at a certain amount of time for a particular batch size is to ensure that as it keeps on falling on that turn, that it doesn't dip below that 70 degree point. Because I've quickly learned, if I go below 70 degrees and I'm already at 100% gas, I have nowhere else to go. I have no other options. So framing up the first, and we're going to talk about, and then it's the first, basically the first 3 minutes of your roast is about framing yourself up for success. So let's watch and see where our turning point ends up. So we can see that our turning point is going to be hitting around 75. So that's where it stays stable, and now it's starting to go up. Great. So the turning point was at 75, happy days. So I have essentially almost, I've got a 10 kilo batch. Now I can say to myself, great, it's a nice way to start confirming that was 225 the right temperature to start with? Was waiting for 30 seconds before introducing that 100% gas the right decision? If I had have introduced that 100% gas at 15 seconds, then no doubt the turning point would have been a lot hotter, because that will then affect my next goal. My next checkpoint is my momentum checkpoint. Now, this is something that I've tapped in at 3 minutes. So at 3 minutes, I want to make sure that I'm sitting anywhere between 115 to 120 degrees. So this is then going to tell me again, from a momentum perspective, have I set myself up for success for this particular batch size and for the roasting style that I want to do? So let's see in terms of, by the time we get to 3 minutes, what temperature are we sitting at for this roast? Because then we need to start talking about, okay, great, that's all good and well. We might hit our 3 minute mark. How on earth do I know what do I need to start doing with my gas? How do I know when to start turning it down? What kind of decisions, what am I going to start focusing on? So now we're getting close to our 3 minute checkpoint. And it looks like, we're framing up quite nicely to be sitting in that 115 to 120 temperature range. Awesome. So at 3 minutes, we're going to be sitting at 118, almost 119 degrees. So that's where I can say to myself again, fantastic. For this particular coffee, it was a good decision to start at that temperature. I was idling appropriately. I introduced maximum heat at the right time. I turned at a desirable temperature and time, and I've hit my 3 minute momentum checkpoint. So let's quickly look at the software here in terms of all these curves that are starting to map out. So this blue line here is the bean temperature. So this is coming from the probe that was lower in the door. This red line here is our exhaust. Now this red squiggly line here is the rise rate curve for the exhaust. And then this blue wiggly line in the background is the rise rate curve that we all tend to kind of like really focus hard on and watching while we're roasting. But I want to bring a bit of notice to the rise rate curve for the exhaust, because this curve is really cool in terms of helping to support any roasting decisions that you're making throughout the roast, especially this first next decision in terms of, how do I know when to start turning down the gas? So you can essentially see the rise rate has hit a peak right here, and it's on its way down. We haven't done anything, haven't touched the gas, everything's at 100%, but the rise rate is on its way down. So essentially the mass of coffee is really now starting to take on the heat, and then you can start to see the energy falling in the exhaust. So that's a sign to me that then what's going to happen, that rise rate on the exhaust is going to start peaking again. And that's the first sign on when to start turning down your gas. So this is a really great decision point on now what to do next. So we now know momentum-wise we're doing really well. So if we keep an eye here on the exhaust rise rate, you will start to see it kicking up. So this is where here, so see how it's starting to shoot up? Now for me as a roaster, I look at the bean temperature and I go, great, at 130 degrees, I'm now going to start moving, I'm going to go down by 10% gas. So now that I've got my 3 minute checkpoint and my momentum's on check, my next main checkpoint goal is to get the beans to turn colour and to turn yellow definitely by 5.5 minutes for this particular batch size. So the goal of all of these gas steps is to actually reach that yellow colour change. So that's how gas steps evolve, is based on a desire to get to a particular event. Okay, so let's keep going. So now the rise rate exhaust peaked and I went down by 10%. So I'm not afraid to say I'm quite a strategic roaster. I do quite like to keep things quite structured. So I will time my gas adjustments I'll think in terms of every 10 degrees, I am then going to start going down, 10%. But it's also really good to see that your gas adjustments are also timing with the peak in the exhaust rise rate as well. So now essentially my goal between 3 minutes and 5.5 minutes is to now control the heat in the system, control the heat in the beans, and get those beans to turn yellow by 5.5 minutes. So every time there's a slight peak in the rise rate, it's also timing with a temperature check and then a gas adjustment. So I'm going to keep on going down in 10% increments until I get to 160. So remember back on the beans where I was exploring the machine and the probes, and I found out and I understood that my color change on the probe for this particular machine is going to occur anywhere between 160 to 165. So I ultimately want to be controlling the mass of coffee and the system to get to that event at the right time. So now at 160, you'll notice that we jump straight down to a 50% gas adjustment. Now the reason is now because I know that here you'll see we're getting very close to marking color change, and we're at that 5.5 minute range. So fantastic. So I've done my color change mark. I achieved it at 5.5 minutes. I now had to make a deeper gas adjustment because now my desire, based on trial and error and tasting, is I now want to get to my next event, which is first crack. Now, between yellow and first crack, my desire is to get there in 4 minutes. So again, I'm adjusting the heat and the system in order to get to that next event in 4 minutes time. And all the time, I'm also keeping an eye on the peaks in the rise rate in the exhaust as a way to also help me confirm those gas adjustments as well. Now, also too, over here, underneath the bean temperature, we have this rise rate over here that's ticking away. Now, this is like our speedo. How fast do I want to be going at a certain time in the roast? So by the time I get to yellow, we had, I like to have my intervals reading at 60 seconds. That's just the way I like to work. I like to be able to glance at my speed, how many degrees am I going per minute, so I can make a better decision. Essentially what I say to myself is, if I don't touch the gas, where am I going to be in a minute's time? And I can add that rise rate value to my bean temperature and really predict and think ahead. Where am I going to be if I don't touch anything? But I do have a desired rate at which I want to be going at. So sitting at about 14 degrees at yellow. And so again, my gas adjustments is to get to first crack in about 4 minutes and to have that rise rate sitting at about 8 degrees per minute by the time I get to crack. So we're going to summarize all of this as well. So once we go through the roast curve, there's going to be a snapshot of the profile, then there'll be a manual profile, and then a summary. So don't worry, and it's great that this is being recorded as well, because then you can stop and start it and watch it again. But in terms of decision points, you can see already, if you're a new roaster, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot of decisions going on about why you're doing something. So my ultimate goal right now is to keep on controlling the energy in the system, in the coffee, and get to first crack by a specific time with the right amount of energy. So I want to be making sure that I'm at least at an 8 degree per minute rise rate, so then I've got plenty of energy to finish off my roast. So again, we're keeping an eye on those peaks and troughs on the exhaust rise rate. So 180, we've got a major peak happening here, go down on the gas. And I'm keeping an eye on this rise rate number here in terms of making sure then I'm just gradually cruising my way in. Now, depending on whether you're doing, whether it be an espresso roast or a filter roast, there will be a specific idea about a certain rise rate that you want to have. And we're going to touch on that in the summary when we finish going through the curve. Now, we're getting close to the business end because I know, again, from exploring this roaster and the probe, I know that that first crack is going to happen anywhere between 202 to 203. So I'm essentially just controlling the roaster and the machine with the gas adjustments to get to that temperature with the right amount of energy. So again, we've got a peak in the rise rate. We're at 190. We're going to do a gas change. And so heading into that first crack event is all about it's a real balancing act between your gas adjustments. And again, this is where trial and error that we've all gone through many times. And you come up with your list of steps because it's giving you a specific result in the cup. And then another peak, going down on the gas again. And now we're getting very close to first crack. Because when we get to first crack, this is where those end parameters come into play. How do I know how to finish the roast? So again, the most terrifying part of roasting is knowing how to start and knowing how to finish. So we have an end goal of doing a milk-based espresso roast with full-bodied, really rich flavors. And we're going to talk through how to finish the roast. Okay. So we're getting close to that first crack event. Now, here I'm very tempted. So you'll see, and I will point out, and this is where there's been lots of questions with roasters on when do you react and when do you not react to feedback in your rise rate. Really quickly, the reason why I didn't react to this feedback is because my exhaust was on its way down. If I had have overcorrected this bump in the rise rate, I would have gotten myself into a lot of trouble and I would have lost energy in my rise rate. This feedback here, I ignore because to me, that's the indication that first crack is just about to happen. To me, that's that burst in energy. Plus, I know I have a hard bean in the roaster. If I overcorrect and respond to that kick in the rise rate, I will lose that roast, and that's when you get into trouble and you have that issue with the crashing and losing energy. So I do essentially just close my eyes. I know that the rise rate has kicked up a little bit, but just now watch and see what happens once we hit first crack. So you can see first crack is going to get marked now, and you'll see the rise rate all of a sudden start diving down, quite decently. Another thing I want to quickly point out is the feedback in the exhaust curve here. This little dip, this is my fault. So when I, in terms of installing a separate exhaust probe, if it's not in quite the right position, then when I pull the trier out, I do get a lot of feedback on that curve. So that is actually, an external influence. So I just wanted to point that out. That's from the trier coming out. Okay, so we've marked first crack. Happy days. We got first crack at 9 minutes 14 and 203.3. Now, in order to finish this roast, I say to myself, I'm doing a nice sugar dark milk-based espresso blend. Now, I know that I want to then finish at least 15 degrees from that 203. So I'm going to plant a seed, an end point of 218. That's my end goal. That's what I need to achieve. And I want to do that in at least 3 minutes. So from first crack to the end of the roast, I'm telling myself, I need to control this energy, this massive coffee that's now cracking, and I need to control the roaster, and I need to have roast steps and percentages in place So I can get that 15 degrees in about 3 minutes. Now, I'm also using my sensory. I'm definitely watching the color, the expansion of the bean, and you definitely work out then based on color measurements, which we'll look at when we finish, how you can then confirm your roast color measurements with your desired amount of degrees at the end. So I've said to myself, great, my gas adjustments now is I need to get to 218 at least by 12 minutes 15 or 12 minutes 20. So I've planted the end seed and end point of an end temperature and an end time. I just need to work out how to drive this roaster and this coffee to get to that end point. So on this particular roaster, again, you'll see at first crack, after the dip and rise, there's always a very major rise in the exhaust rise rate. I always ignore that first kick. I definitely don't respond to that. I wait for it to go down, and then on the next rise, on that rise rate for the exhaust is when I will then start backing down. So you can see there's a kick happening here. Now, generally I find that will also happen 1 minute after first crack as well. So I work in 5% increments after first crack in order to get my 15 degrees in my 3 minutes. So you'll see that I'll do an adjustment at 1 minute with a rise rate of about 6 degrees per minute. Then I'm going to do another one at 1:45, and my rise rate is going to be sitting at about 4 degrees per minute. And then I'm going to do another one at 30 seconds where my rise rate will be about 3 to 3.5 degrees. And that's going to allow me to still have the right amount of energy to get to that 218 at the end. So you can see here there's another kick happening, and that's happening at around 1:45. So then I'm going to change my gas. And you can just keep on gradually just wiggling your way out of the roast. You're maintaining the right amount of energy in your exhaust, and there's going to be a point at the end of the roast where they just come together and meet. They might cross kind of slightly, and I do attribute that also to my probe positioning for my exhaust probe, so I don't stress about that too much. But the ultimate goal is just cruising the energy out so I can get to my end goal. So there's my 30-second, my last adjustment. So now I've got a rise rate in the mid threes, and my end goal is to get to 218 in about 3 minutes after first crack. So now I've got all the time in the world now, well, 30 seconds, where I can check my trier, I can keep on following my sensory, because now my roast is set up. It's just cruising out. You can hear the cooling tray kicking on, so it's really important that you have your cooling tray and your arms ready to go. All you've got to do now is just focus on the coffee and pull it out when you think it's ready. So here we go in terms of getting close to 218. And the roast is done. So essentially, this is the kind of stuff that I wish I was told before I stepped up to a roaster or when I started roasting, because as we know, a lot of us, we're all self-taught, and we're potentially taught by other roasters that were self-taught and may have never had the opportunity to have. I know when we all first started roasting, we didn't have, really good software. We would be manually tracking and writing things down, which there's nothing wrong with. But in terms of giving us an answer as to why am I doing that particular, step? How am I making that decision? What's driving my decision? Again, for the new roasters, hopefully it's giving you an idea about everything that's involved in terms of better understanding, making those decisions. And maybe for experienced roasters, you may have seen something that you kind of went, oh, that's kind of cool. I never actually realized the importance of following the kicks and the bumps in the exhaust rise rate. It's a really great way to confirm when to make some key adjustments in the energy in the system and to control your way through the whole roast. Now, I know that wasn't, it's not an overly, geeky, perspective. It's just a really raw nuts and bolts perspective on this is what I'm focusing on when I'm roasting. I have an end goal in mind, an end roast level in mind, and I'm really using specific bits of data to help me think through and interpret my way through the roast. So then this is what it looks like. This is the much cleaner version, that you would get, when you want to go back into, really analysing your roast. But for me, I'm also then very interested in clarifying, did I get my stages, my timing right? Did I get my green to yellow to crack to finish in the right time? Those of you that don't have software is to really look at it from a manual perspective. There are definitely great ways to map out your profile instead of a list of steps. Physically doing, a profile for yourself, and also working out how to do, your rise rate curve in the background so you can see how you're moving your way through. But the thing I love about these manual profiles, it's tangible and you can look at it and you can step back and make great decisions because you've got your rise rate mapped out from minute to minute, and it really gives you an idea about the speed and the rate at which you're moving a lot more clearly. As well as all of your key phase data as well. But back to the roast log. So with the El Salvador that we roasted, remember my desire was to roast a really nice milk-based espresso roast. And here you can see, it's a record of all of your key data, and then using your roast log, when you go and cup and taste your coffee, you come back to your parameters guide and you go, well, for my milk based, I wanted to get my phases in this time. I want this particular weight loss. I want to be with this particular development ratio. I want to move this amount of degrees, this amount of time, and I want my agtron measurements, my color measurements to have this particular delta spread. So, and your parameters, you're basically then just checking yourself to make sure that you've done everything to frame up that particular product. So definitely, do your due diligence, back yourself up so that you can succeed. You've got to back yourself up with data. You've got to collect data. It's the most important thing, because then it allows you to enjoy your roasting, and it allows you to enjoy the sensory part of roasting and the creative part of roasting. And if you're not, recording your information and your data, then you're just not going to enjoy it. And then, of course, so here's the summary in terms of the decision points for this milk-based espresso profile based on a 3mm probe on the Probatoni. So deciding on a charge temperature, based on your batch size, your moisture content, and your screen size. I'm essentially deciding to start with a certain temperature and a burner percentage because I want to avoid scorching, and I also want to set up the energy to have the right amount of momentum and preparation, because that's what the first part of the roast is all about: momentum and preparation. And then as the beans drop in, you're introducing maximum heat by a certain time. Again, the idea is to avoid any scorching, but I do not want to drop below a certain temperature, which is 70 degrees in this case. And on my Probatoni, that is for all batch sizes. So whether I'm doing a 4 kilo, a 6 kilo, an 8 kilo, a 10 kilo, a 12 kilo, I do not want to drop below 70 degrees, especially if I'm on a full batch, because if I'm already at 100%, I've got nowhere else to go. And you'll realize pretty quickly if you've lost the roast and if you're going too slow. And dare I say, if you realize early enough, and I've definitely done it before, just take the roast out. If it's 2 minutes into the roast, I can hear the gasps of shock already. If it's 2 minutes into the roast, and if you realize you haven't hit your first checkpoints, then don't put yourself through the pain of trying to roast that coffee. Start again. It's totally possible. Essentially, there's no key chemical reactions happening in the first 2 minutes of that roast. So don't be afraid to back yourself and take it out and start again. Of course, cool it down, put it to the side and start again. But then the next key is that momentum check. By 3 minutes, I need to be at a certain temperature, because again, if I'm going too slow, if I had have been at 110 by 3 minutes, game over. I know I'm in for a world of pain for the rest of the roast. If I'm going too fast, I would much rather be going too fast than too slow. If I'm going too fast, I have the ability to control that. If I'm going too slow, I definitely don't have the ability to control that. Have a desired peak for you want your rise rate to be peaking at a particular point. We were peaking at about 26 degrees per minute. Once you get that momentum check, your next key event is to start controlling the system and the coffee to get to that color change by a certain time and certain temperature, and to have a rise rate, between 14 to 15 degrees per minute. I want to spend at least 4 minutes between yellow and first crack. That's my personal preference based on flavor and trial and error. There's going to be many, many different opinions in terms of when to get to these two key phases based on, specific flavor preferences. And then the key is to get to first crack at the right time with the right amount of energy. You still need to have the right amount of, rise rate or rate of change so that you have enough energy to be able to finish your roast. And I would say that's probably the most common issue, is a lot of people either go too fast or too slow in these two initial sections in the profile, and they don't head into first crack with the right amount of energy specific to the product that you're trying to roast. So in terms of, if you're doing a milk-based, a single origin, a filter, you're going to have a range of different energy that you want to be heading into crack with. And I do use knowledge about the density of the bean for this part of the roast. If I have a hard bean, I'm not afraid to have a much higher rate of energy heading into crack. Definitely with a soft bean, you do need to keep an eye on that energy going into crack, and you're going to be making more control on a softer bean in order to get to the same endpoint as a harder bean, which may potentially need less control because it needs more help to get through that part of the roast. This is all the kind of cool stuff that we can cover in the mastermind groups. Now, Lee, I am going to take advantage of an extra 5 or 10 minutes, if that's okay. And then we can move on to the Q&A, if that's right, because I just want to finish this.
Of course, go ahead. You do you. You take as
Cool.
long as you need. I've got to tell you, this is incredible, Anne. Thank you. Just take all the time.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So more than anything, it's about explaining roasting in terms of just the reality of what it is. We can go and get geeky and, we can read the books, attend, other, events and chat with other roasters and all that kind of stuff. But really at the end of the day, this is the nuts and bolts of, this is the kind of stuff that we're focusing on and thinking about. Again, it's back to, how do I know how to start? How do I know how to control? How do I know how to finish? Like, what the hell do I do? So I'm just trying to offer some reality in terms of what we're focusing on. And then in terms of how to finish, this is, again, the trickiest part, but again, use your data along with your sensory. This is where they work really well together in terms of, it's when do I look at the coffee? When do I look at the data? How do I calculate and make a decision? And how do I back myself and know when to take that coffee out? So backing yourself up with color measurements, along with then those parameters, relevant to your probe. And just, knowing in terms of, at the end of the day, we're driving this roaster basically just to get from event to event. And that's where gas steps come about. They're our, your gas is your accelerator or your brake, to get to each event. Your exhaust is your gas in the tank. It's your energy to get to the end. And your bean temperature is like your guide points, is your signposts from the probe. And so we're just constantly responding to the feedback. And we're using also then the rate of rise, or those degrees from minute per minute, as a gauge of our speed. Are we going too fast? Are we going too slow? And then go from there. And then, of course, backing it up by, so in the current issue of Roast Magazine, my latest article is on production roast evaluation. So if you get a chance to read that, it's a really great way to reinforce great ways or best practices in terms of your production roast evaluation. Please taste your coffee. It's really important that you back yourself up and taste your coffee, but also give yourself a clear way to analyze and taste your coffee as well. So you'll see the desire for this El Salvador as a milk-based espresso was for it to be milk chocolate, big body, brown sugar sweetness, hazelnut and toffee. And through trial and error, that's how you then come up with your profile and your steps and your roasting approach. Keeping your production roast valuation really, really simple. And back yourself up. So, and again, that's a definitely, a mastermind group thing to focus on as well. But yeah, so more than anything, data, and that's where the data is knowledge is power comes from. But I did want to finish on one great question that came through was, there's so many different variables and equipment and styles when it comes to roasting coffee. Where do you even start? And in your opinion, which variables should be paid more attention to, which we kind of touched on with the decision points and the roast curve, but it's which ones should be mostly left alone. And this is the contentious point in terms of how do we use our rise rate and how do we use that development time and the development ratio percentage. To me, the development ratio percentage is a bit of a dangerous value to focus on. And this is what we would have done in Portland if we would have had the chance to taste some samples to help demonstrate what not to focus on. We've got to remember that the development ratio percentage, it's just a snapshot of one part of the profile. And a lot of roasters make the mistake of defining their roast just with this percentage value, which is very dangerous because it doesn't tell you how did you get there. So your development ratio percentage is just in relation to where you mark first crack and in relation to then the overall time of the roast. So it's only talking about that one section. It doesn't tell you how did you get to yellow and then how did you get to crack? Did you get there too fast? Did you get there too slow? So a great way to visualize it is we would have done some roasting examples in terms of, you can see here the same coffee, 3 different profiles, but with the exact same development ratio percentage. So one is a long roast, one's like a medium, kind of length roast, and one is a really short roast, but they all have the same development ratio percentage. So this is probably a better example here. So when we taste this, of course, the longer roast, because it had more time in the roaster, and they all finished with the same end temperature, which is really important when you do experiments, is to make sure that you have those values the same. But because of where we marked first crack, in order to get that, extend that roast and take longer to get to that end temperature, it meant then that the timing of your key events gets affected. Now, the timing of those key events, we've got to remember, that's connected to a physical change that has a specific chemical reaction that's then connected to a specific flavor. So just because that endpoint is almost, essentially the same percentage, there's a lot more going on. So that would be an example of, things that I wouldn't, what not to focus on. Don't stress yourself out by getting that the same, because everything that's going on before here is going to be affected as well. So again, back yourself up with your roast data and, give yourself a way to see your way through your roasting and being more decisive. And that's it. Phew. So yeah, thank you so much. That was a lot to cram in an hour. But again, please be reassured in terms of there's going to be plenty of opportunity to go into a lot more depth with the mastermind groups, which I'm super excited about. And I can't thank Map It Forward enough for putting that together. And I really look forward to chatting with a lot of you and conspiring to your success as a roaster.
Fantastic. You could do me a favor.
Yep.
And we should be good to go for the Q&A. Before we do, can I just tell you that was so engaging, Anne? Thank you. I was able to keep up the whole way through, and I've never roasted a batch of coffee in my life. And the other thing about it was, here was my 2 big takeaways, and this is going to lead me into what I want to focus on with the Q&A, is
Yep.
You take ownership for the decisions that you make and the things that don't go your way.
Yep.
I see you nodding really, really intensely there. And in the third section of this, we're going to talk big time about why that's so important through the article that you and Rob Hughes wrote together.
100%.
Shout out to Rob. I know that he's tuning in. But, you know, the whole way through that, I was writing down some notes, and I wrote, she takes ownership and makes it approachable because of the ownership, and that equals empowerment.
Yeah, 100%.
And as we enter a time of extreme uncertainty that is COVID, I feel like as coffee professionals, and I'm going to pretend I'm a roaster right now and just say that as roasters, I think one thing that's going to be super empowering is just stepping into that uncertainty and saying, what don't I know? And how can I just learn it? And I think what you just demonstrated was that that's what you advocate for, right?
Yeah, and I think just kind of like a really quick, on that point, I'll never forget the first time. It was because I was getting pressure from a salesperson, and they said, we need to roast more filter. And I'm going, but it's not a part of our portfolio. I've got a 22 kilo roaster, but they only needed, 2 kilos. And so I had to learn how to do a 5 kilo batch or minimum batch on a, 22 kilo drum. And I never forget standing there going, holy moly, what do I do? But then I said to myself, don't worry, just follow the coffee. And I know that sounds really wishy-washy, and it really breaks my heart when I do hear out there, the thought process of that following the physical change of the green is old school. It's bloody everything. It's like, because it makes you check in with the coffee, you then check in with your data, you then assign the data to that, that physical change, because then because by that point, your machines really well, your probes, where things are happening. So you've just got to drive then the system and the coffee to get to each checkpoint. And it's having the confidence, to back yourself. And so just because it's a 5 kilo batch, or just because it's a really expensive coffee, try not to let that, scare the pants off you. Just know that, one thing I did forget to say in terms of, essentially at the end of the day, it's the biggest joke in the industry. We are really all just turning beans brown. We are just going from green to brown. It's how we do it. And that's the scariest part, because we want to know, we want to be told, but then it's not fun then if you're told and you follow. It's really fun when you work it out, when you give yourself the chance to really nut it out and understand. And that's when you can step back and confidently say, oh, well, I do it this way because of blah, blah, blah. But it is in response to, and I understand the frustration with new roasters, because if they're not told specifics about, the machine and, how to work with that machine and read, certain bits of, data and stuff, then they're going to be reading something and trying to follow it, and it's not working because they didn't understand or realize that they're working with a particular probe. They've got limitations in the controls because it just can't do it, all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of cool stuff we can geek out on, definitely in the Can You Taste the Roasting system, and in the mastermind
groups.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's just talk to everyone a bit about what we mean by these mastermind groups, because we haven't announced this yet. So let's announce it. So as an extension of today's presentation, we have extended and opened up 4 mastermind groups that are going to happen online with Anne. And the way that we've constructed them is with the intention of making them accessible, affordable, and intentional. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. As you can see from the first hour, Anne is great at talking to people who have never roasted before, but can also talk to experts. Mastermind groups or coaching groups are all about putting people who are of a similar kind of experience level together so that they can leverage the shared information that they have with a mentor, or a coach, and in this instance, it's Anne. So we're going to break it up into the 4 levels are people who haven't roasted before or are new to roasting, and we call those puppy roasters. And so they're roasters who have never roasted or have been roasting for 2 years. up to 2 years. That's level 1. Level 2 is roasters who are in their mid-career years as a roaster. And so that's people who have been roasting from 2 to 5 years. Then we have people who are experienced roasters, and that's level 3. Everyone who's been roasting for 5 years and up. And then there's level 4. And so they are people who are roasters at any level, but roasters who are business owners as well. And a lot of that is going to include Anne's expertise with all the consulting that she's done and owning her own business and helping so many businesses get off the ground, be able to adapt the information that she has learnt from a business perspective and as a roaster. So she'll be helping you make those kinds of decisions about purchasing machines, about fit outs and what you're going to need to consider, et cetera, right, Anne?
Inventory control, planning,
All
everything. Yeah, because I'm definitely very, very passionate with roasters, really understanding the business aspect of their roasting as well, 100%.
And so what we've done is there are different. We're going to keep the groups quite small. So the groups are limited to 10 people per group. And the price levels are, so for group 1 and 2, so anyone who has been roasting up to 5 years, there's $75 per month to be a part of this mastermind group. For level 3, it's $100 per month. And level 4, it's $150 per month. And you'll meet twice a month for 2 hours as a group online. We've designated some of the guidelines in the in where you can go, which is mapperforward.org/group coaching. And you'll see Anne has a thing you can click on there. It's very clearly marked for Anne Cooper. And we've got some loose guidelines about the times and days that will happen, but essentially what we'll do, you can be anywhere in the world to do this. It's going to all be digital. It's all going to be interactive. We'll work with Anne and you to come up with times that work best for everybody in the group. And then we will set the schedules. You'll have meeting invites that you turn up to. You'll get billed automatically. It's just a subscription thing. It works seamlessly. You'll just turn up every second week, twice a month, and you'll meet. Now, the way a mastermind group works is you got to show up with problems that you want to tackle. Yep. So it's going to require you to show up with some vulnerability. And that's why we've put you in groups, or we will put you in groups with people who have similar experience to what you have. And that way, you won't feel weird by asking questions that you think more experienced people in the room will have. So we're not going to match you with people who have been roasting for 10 years when you've never roasted a batch. Okay, so you're in the best hands ever if you're attending one of these mastermind groups with Anne. And that was demonstrated in the presentation from this morning. If you want to be a part of this, once today's presentation is over, we'll also put the link in the chat, and we'll email you after this as well. So you'll be able to register. It is limited to 10 seats per group. And if you can't get access to the group, it means it's full up. Okay, so you'll be waitlisted then, and we'll contact you when a space opens up. But I'm assuming that this will open up. This will fill up pretty quickly, and if you want to be a part of this, get in quickly. So,
cool.
From here, it's going to be great. From here, that leads us to why we decided that we wanted to do this, the mastermind groups, and my thinking behind it was, with all the COVID-19 stuff that's going on, with all the social distancing, with all the uncertainty, with all of that, the exchange of knowledge and information is leaving people limited with how they can get access to that. So public cuppings are gone. You're being invited to a lot less stuff where you may have learnt from other people in the past. And so what we thought was that why not give people the opportunity to be a part of a select kind of an insulated situation where they're not going to be exposed to any viruses or anything like that they're not normally at home doing. They're not in danger, but they can still learn and they can still ask questions. And it'll be through videos, so it'll be interactive. If we look at something like that and we start diving into the hundreds of questions that we received for this workshop, and they were intense. They're all very intense for all the right reasons. I want to ask you one in particular. With so many issues to think about, what are the key points to consider right now? What, like you as a roaster, what are the key things top and center of your profession as a roaster and your ownership with a roasting brand? What are the things that you're thinking about the most?
Well, I think definitely like in terms of the things that are highlighted, I mean, straight away, whether it was, for us and a lot of people around the world, I mean, initially, like the first 2 weeks was basically 100% drop in wholesale.
Yeah.
So straight away, everyone's just freaking out going, oh my God. And if you're a business that only has a wholesale focus, and initially we didn't know how to deal with what was going on. There was this, thought that we would be shut down completely and there wouldn't be an ability to work around it. So until we worked out how to work around that, then, the things to consider was like, okay, straight away you've got, people that you work with, like how do we work? I mean, they can't come into work. Then it was the green in terms of a lot of us have inventory secured to use by a certain time. And now we're faced with, we're not going to use it in time. But then we also know that fresh crop is on its way as well. So we're in a little bit, there's that, sort of like side of things to consider in terms of how am I going to manage moving through current stock, as well as managing, the usual process with the fresh crop coming in. But then when we all started to realize that then we had the opportunity to flip our focus and focus more on retail.
Right.
And that's 100% brought up, some really, fascinating, issues points to think about in terms of, do we need to consider, it's like, our packaging, our labeling, how do we get noticed? The market's flooded. Then the postal service, like here in Australia, our postal service is
they shit the bed big time on this.
It's not great.
They
so
really
that let a lot of people down because there was a massive influx of orders, and then coffee wasn't arriving for almost close to a month for some people.
Really?
Because it just got caught up in the system. It's definitely improved now because we know we're used to it. But I also want to highlight as well things to consider in terms of when we did realize that we could continue roasting and continue operating. It definitely highlighted, I think, for roasting, kind of what I touched on in the beginning in terms of our processes and our procedures and the way that we handle ourselves in the roastery. So I got asked some really great questions about personal protection equipment,
Right.
and how do we use that in the roastery, because dare I say, depending on the size of the roastery, if it's a small roastery through to a large roastery, the large roasters are really good at having that equipment in
On
place
hand.
in terms of use. It's the smaller roasters, they're around, they're in the third drawer kind of thing, like, it's there, but it's not enforced.
Okay.
Because it really got me thinking. I know when the health inspector comes to visit, the only thing they're concerned about is things dropping in the coffee, whether it be in the cooling tray or through the filtering process. Not once do they ever say, where's your steel cap boots? Where's your mask? Where's your gloves? Are you making sure you're wearing your earplugs for the noise? Yeah, all that kind of stuff. It really highlights also too, roasting is such a sensory skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I know personally, I'm probably, not a great example in the sense of I don't enjoy wearing earplugs because I want to be able to listen, because you're very connected to the sound of whether it's the packing machine going, the way the fan moves, the way the drum moves. Like there's all these sounds that and when something changes in the world of roasting, I would definitely say it's the one industry where if something changes, act on it. Like it's kind of like that. It's not crying wolf. Something's about to happen if something changes. It's a guaranteed thing. So, but the personal protection equipment thing really fascinated me because when the person asked the question, because I've got an equilibrium group of everyone that's done consulting and training with me, and they just wanted to know, we want to make sure we're looking after our team and making sure we're helping them be safe. And I went, oh my God, there's no one answering. And it's because it's not something that's monitored and enforced enough,
Right.
and doesn't need to be. So that really fascinated me in terms of the way that we work in our roasteries and operate in terms of safety, occupational health and safety. It's definitely highlighted COVID has, in terms of social distancing, we have to work alone more than ever. So as a roaster, I might only be roasting 100 kilos, but normally if there's somebody helping you, they can help you scoop out the green, they can help you weigh out, finish off weighing out the roasted. They can then go off and start packing. But when with COVID, you've got to do everything yourself. You've got to do, the green, the roasting. So it's really highlighting how many times do you want to touch that coffee from green to the retail bag? And that's going to be a lot. So it's just really reinforcing more physical effort in terms of that perspective. Cutting down on teams.
Can
And
I
the amount of
ask you
people.
something there?
Yep.
Is that changing your economy of movements and your workflow strategies? Is it forcing you into getting a lot better at managing your workflow?
Yeah, 100%. That's a great point. It definitely makes you be more organized for sure. And yeah, kind of like what I was alluding to, at the beginning, like you've got to be organized with your roasting so you can enjoy it. There's nothing worse than, you're roasting and you're stressing about like going, gosh, I've got to weigh out, more green, or I've got to, work out where am I going to put this roasted coffee. If you have everything, laid out and set out ready to go, then you can enjoy the process a lot more. But yeah, 100% in terms of that movement and strategy about moving around the roastery, 100%. And then,
Go ahead. And then?
Well, I was just then going to touch on, some of my points in terms of how we've been forced to flip into retail in terms of
this is an interesting one.
Yeah, because I think it really highlights, because you see a lot of people going, oh, I've got my coffee in the local grocery store or the local whatever it is. And it also really highlights labeling laws. And I don't know if a lot of roasters are aware that there's some really strict laws in terms, like federal laws, in terms of what has to be on your labeling. Because I have had, roasters in the past get pulled up, they get inspected, and then they have to do a product recall because their product isn't labeled properly.
What kinds of examples are you talking about? What are the kinds of things that would cause a recall with regards to roasted coffee?
So if you don't have the weight, displayed clearly, the contents, and also there's now slowly being things like, even nutritional value, all that kind of stuff. But definitely, where the product is from that's in the bag and where it was roasted. But the big one for some reason is the weight. If the weight isn't displayed clearly enough on the packaging, and it has to be on the front of the bag. Things like that, it is enough for the product to get recalled just because of that simple mistake on a label. So my fear is for roasters rushing to flip to retail and, not thinking through that. It's like, great, we've got, bags, we've got stuff online
We've got
ready
brown
to sell.
coffee.
Yeah, yep, let's sell it, kind of thing.
I'm going to put it in a brown bag. I'm going to put my logo on it and I'm going to try and sell it.
Yeah.
There are food safety laws for a reason.
Yes.
There are food labeling laws for a reason.
Correct.
And this is the kind of thing that the business mastermind group will be fantastic for, because you have the experience in understanding what's required to make all of that happen. And, something that you and I spoke about with regards to this stuff a couple of days ago was the different ways that businesses are going to have to adapt quickly
Yep.
on a whole bunch of different things with regards to their response to COVID-19. And something that we kept seeing coming up online, and I'm hearing with a lot of my clients, is, am I going to have to start roasting darker? And you and I had that conversation.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that question?
This is a really fascinating question, because I get it. I totally understand it, but it also confuses me, because it brings up so many thoughts in terms of, if I can just like brain dump.
Please do. Please do. We'll work it out, because we didn't quite get to a final kind of conclusion about what we should do. So, and we wanted to work through it here logically, so that we could unpack the pros and cons of roasting and not roasting, right? So roasting darker and not roasting darker.
Yeah, because I totally get, understanding, with a consumer base in terms of thinking about their barista skill or ability, their brewing ability. So is it up to us to provide a product that's flexible, to be able to go through that, range of experience in brewing ability? However, retail for me, like, I love retail. I think it's an amazing market.
So fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's a chance. I do think it's the one chance for roasters to beat their chest and actually say, this is me. You either like it or you don't, and you buy it if you like it. And if you don't like it, that's great.
Right.
But I do understand the fear at the moment is, because we don't have the backup of wholesale, if a consumer doesn't like your retail product and they don't want to buy it, are you then forced to rethink, your roasting approach just to make sales? Okay, right. I get that. I do get that. But the other thing that I fear for the industry is, are roasters going to fall into the same trap? Because as, like, how do I say this in terms of, like, cafes not charging enough for coffee. So the reasoning is that as roasters, we do our due diligence. We've got our amazing relationships with our producers. We're doing our best to make sure that we're paying the right prices. We're then passing that through, the right channels with our wholesale pricing and products, and we've got all our different levels, and we're selling it at the right price, on selling at the right price. But what we then found, that cafe owners are absorbing that cost and not passing it on to
right, and the margins
consumer.
Just shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink.
So the consumer still has this notion, they don't understand that they're tasting this bloody amazing coffee from an amazing producer that you've built this great relationship with, because they're focused on getting a well-priced cup of coffee, 3-4 times a day kind of thing.
Right.
My fear with changing the roasting approach is, as roasters, are we going to fall into the same trap where we're then going to teach consumers the message that this is what coffee should taste like? Just because they like a dark roasted coffee doesn't mean that we have to follow suit and change our style. This is such a...
Right, so I'm going to give you the other side of that, right?
Yeah. So, but I was just going to say, like, it's, why should I change my roasting style? Why can't I use this as an opportunity to help, educate consumers on a well-roasted, expressed coffee, in terms of, like, right, it's been roasted a certain way, because we want them to taste it. We don't want them to, like, and then this is where, with consumers, and I often say, you've got the drinkers and the tasters. You've got those that just want to chug a cup of coffee and just drink it. They just want to just get their day started. And then you've got the tasters. So then I guess with retail, you've got the opportunity to market to the tasters or the drinkers, like, which direction do you go in? And so my fear is that we fall into the trap of the cafes, of then teaching consumers that it's a particular level kind of product, and I don't.
And
It
there's a
just
set price for a latte, and that's just what coffee costs, and all coffee's the
and that's just
same.
what it
And
is. Yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly.
And
Yep,
so
yep,
let me play devil's advocate to that,
yep.
because I
I just sort of had
absolutely
to.
see that perspective, your
Mm,
perspective,
yep,
100%.
yep.
And I think it's the problem that cafes haven't been able to solve with beverages. And I think if roasters get into the same habit, and they'll potentially end up in the same pitfall. And it's why I think we have a short window of an opportunity right now, that you and your brands have to play the right, not you, the universal you, everybody has to play their cards right now, because we'll miss the opportunity after this initial phase of COVID. Um, and and look, if you're not registered for the leadership workshop tomorrow, come to that, because Kira from Baratza is going to be talking to us about how many grinders Baratza is selling right now.
Yep, yep.
It is astonishing how many people are buying not a shitty hand grinder or something that's just going to get them through the next couple of weeks. They're forking out for a Baratza grinder. Now, when people are spending the money to get a really great grinder like a Baratza grinder, you know that they know they're in this for the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to help them make the decision of what kind of a relationship they start building with their equipment and with their coffee. And so the reason people are saying, should we start roasting darker, is because the majority of people here in the US are visiting their local Starbucks or their Donut King or those kinds of places that are potentially, well, let's say mostly, they are all roasting very dark. And so the palate of the average consumer over here, not so much in Australia where you are, but the average consumer's palate is geared towards good coffee equals darker
Dark,
roast.
yeah. Whereas I don't think we quite have that.
No, the Australian culture is
Don't
much
have that.
more
Yep,
in a different direction, right?
yep,
And
yep.
so over here, roasters who typically gear themselves towards, who have wholesale customers and are gearing themselves towards a more specialty kind of specialty focused customer or drinker, and now thinking, well, I've got to shift gears. I've got to start positioning retail so that it hopefully covers the fixed costs of running my business, because that's what I've got to focus on right now. You know, people
Yep.
who don't understand what I mean by that, your rent and your wages and your insurance and all of those fixed costs that you get charged, whether you sell 1 pound of coffee or a bazillion pounds of coffee, they're your fixed costs, and they are what are going to bring your business under. Go ahead, Anne.
I was just going to say, just on that as well, I think along with the roasting dark pressure,
Right?
the other thing that I've noticed is the pricing pressure as well, because the
Right.
market's flooded. And I've been seeing a lot of roasters forced to do discounts,
Right.
like lower prices, even offering. I did reach out to a roaster, but they didn't get back to me, and because they're offering their retail at wholesale prices, and initially I was like, oh, okay, sounds good. But then I got thinking about, well, how do you flip your retail customer back to the retail prices that you need to
Yeah.
sell at? And so that's, I guess, where I was also coming with the thinking from, are we
Yeah.
teaching consumers the wrong message
Right.
about our coffee?
Let's follow that through what you just told. So
Mm,
I'm a coffee business coach.
yep,
I work with clients to talk to them about this exact thing. It's not just in roasting and running cafes and
yep,
building teams and all of that kind of stuff. That's what I excel at. Now, if a client came to me and said, I'm gonna do exactly what you just said there. I'm gonna offer my coffee at a wholesale price to my retail customers because I want to win all this business. Let me tell you how dangerous that is and how short-sighted that is for anyone who's listening.
great.
This is the big problem that all of the roasters who are doing the right thing and who are paying a fair price for green coffee, this is what they're complaining about. And the danger of what you're doing if you are buying into this exact practice is this. You are most likely completely unaware of what's about to happen or what is projected to happen by the people in the know to the price of coffee. So the cheap coffee that you're buying and you're selling at wholesale price, because you're going to need to buy the cheapest of cheap coffee in order to sell at wholesale price, make a margin so you can cover your costs. We're on to you. We know that you're doing that. That cheap coffee is about to get very fucking expensive because you're competing with the likes of the biggest supermarket brands right now who are buying up as much coffee as they can, commodity commercial coffee that they can, because they understand that we're here for the long haul.
Yeah.
So if you fall into this very dangerous territory of trying to undercut other people and you're going to use that as a business strategy to get ahead, you're going to find that your business is incredibly short-lived. So what are some of the alternatives to that? Service, 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 service.
Yep.
And I'm going to put a little bit of a floodlight here on Anne and get her to explain a little bit more of why she does what she does for that. And let me tell you why I'm going to do that. Because of all the roasting consultants out there whose clients I have spoken to, the one thing that they all keep coming back to me about with you, Anne, is that it was your service. The knowledge, absolutely, but it's the service of what you provide and the way that you do it that sets you aside. The same thing for Elixir, right? Someone places an order, they leave us a little note that they're sending this as a gift to somebody. One of our team will text them and just say, hey, listen, would you like us to include a little message in a card and that makes them feel really great. So right now is the time where you can get loyal customers for life just by giving a little bit of extra service.
Yep,
so, and
100%.
why don't you tell us some different things that roasters can do with regards to offering better service right now? Do you have any ideas with regards to some, when it comes to your consulting and your coaching and the stuff that you do for roasters, how do you figure out how you can get better service to people?
Well, I think maybe just me aside for a sec, what I'm seeing roasters doing, mostly because they've been forced to and they have to, and I think it's been really good for them, is dealing with the delivery issues. And so a lot of roasters, which has been really awesome, they've been, doing deliveries themselves, or not, that they would normally have relied on, whether it was, the postal service or a courier, and offering more of that personalized, let us deliver to your door, as opposed to relying on the postal service. So I think, that's been really fun, getting that more personal connection with customers. And then I'm just trying to think in terms of, everyone's just trying their best to make sure that they're communicating, really clearly, staying on top of, that whole loop.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, but you mean in terms of me and my consulting and...
Yeah, before you do move on to that, I just wanted to add an idea, something that I shared with a client recently. And I shared it on the podcast. If anyone hasn't found the Map It Forward podcast, there's lots of great information on there about some strategies for this time. But a really great way is to build relationships.
Yep.
You don't have to do that in person.
No.
You can create brewing videos. You can create group chats or Instagram lives. You can offer a personal barista service. And what that means is that someone buys a subscription, they pay for 6 months of it up front. With that, they get half an hour training every month on how to, you do a video chat either via Skype or Zoom or whatever, and you brew coffee with them over Skype.
Yep. Yeah, actually that has been really cool seeing that kind of thing happening with the roasteries. That's been really, really cool. And I guess like for myself, the first thing I did when I set myself up with the consulting was to set up a networking group. And so that way, everybody can stay in touch with each other. They can ask each other questions. I'm constantly posting, whether it's event information. We've also got like a go-to list in terms of, here's a recommended list of technicians to go to. Here's a recommended list of, something else. So they've got somewhere to go if they're feeling lost, and they feel safe too, because it's, a group that they know, and they know that they can, and I've definitely seen some great relationships happen between the roasters, because they might be in a similar area, or they might have the same equipment, and they've bonded over those similarities as well. So providing a platform, I think, for connection, and like you said, with relationships, and putting them in contact with other people that they wouldn't normally get a chance to get in contact with. So whether it's connection to a producer, or to other consultants and experts like Rob, and various scientists and stuff that we're chatting to. And yeah, so definitely that relationship platform
is important.
It's really important, for sure.
Because a lot of what's going on right now is making people realize that money is not the only currency that we're dealing with right now. It's not the only thing that makes you feel okay.
And highlighting more than anything, I guess, again, that coffee it's a relationship industry.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
So much.
Yep.
I feel that at the moment, with roasters having to shift gears from being just roasters behind the scenes, they are also now the pseudo barista if they're shifting to retail. And I feel like that's perhaps one of the missing hats that is, putting a bit of a stress test on roasters right now in the era of COVID. Do you agree?
You mean in terms of having to step forward a bit more and
I
have
find that
connection?
Roasters aren't limelight people a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, we
so
like to
you like to hide behind the machine. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what I'm finding that a lot of roasters are finding uncomfortable is the fact that they have to get on social media, they have to do Instagram lives, and they do need to create videos. It's not so easy to just grab someone these days and say, I need you to come into the roastery and shoot some videos and teach people how to do this stuff. People want to build connections with the people who are making their product right now, right?
True. And there's definitely been some times in the past where, with whoever I was, working with, when the roaster visits a cafe, like you don't realize how exciting it is for whether it's the barista, mostly the baristas get really excited because they get a chance just to geek out and talk about coffee. But if a roaster is feeling uncomfortable with the notion of talking about how to brew their coffee, that in itself for me is, that's a training session in itself, in terms of, do you really know your coffee, and are you taking the time to really understand, your roasting and how it's being, how best to extract it, as opposed to just getting something out there just to sell it. Like, of course people want to know how to get the best out of it. And I guess that's the beauty about, maybe not so much maybe for you guys in the US, but definitely down here, because we've got so many cafe roastery setups. We've got the ability just to walk out to the cafe and test the product like straight away, in terms of, we've got instant feedback with customers. The fact that the customers can also look in and see the roasting. They can talk to you if they, they can ask a question if they want to, and have that connection of like, oh, I just spoke to the roaster. They told me, to buy that particular coffee because it suits this particular brew method, and they also, and I really like giving samples as well. Like if somebody, wants, if they like drinking their coffee, we have a lot of, like, whether it's like French press, there's a lot of stovetop, still at home here. But if they want to try a different product, we'll recommend one. And I said, take a sample of this. You might actually really enjoy, this as well. And it might be a slightly lighter
gateway.
roast. Yeah, exactly. So it's a way to kind of show them, hey, it's for free. I didn't have to pay for it. I can try it, but it's just enough, for them to try. And then they can come back and go, I really want to buy a bag of that, what you gave me a sample of, kind of thing. So that's really fun. That's what I really enjoy about,
well, that's the romance of it, isn't it? That's when you talk about the romance of roasting, like that's the part of what you do. That, and even when I was a barista for 15 years, it was like, that was, and what a city Sydney is to be a barista in. It's pretty amazing to have had that kind of a career. The romance of being able to say to somebody when they come to you and say, I'm going to attempt to make coffee at home. And then to start them on that journey and give them a coffee and then like say to them, how did it go? And did you enjoy it? And they're like, oh man, like I had a few goes at it over the weekend and I could see how it got better. And can you give me some hints? And there's nothing better. That's you in somebody else's kitchen without having to be there. You're there in spirit. You become a part of that process because they've got you, engaged in that. Yep. This is an opportunity that I'm seeing and that I'm telling a lot of my clients. This is a chance for you to remove that middle person. Now they're engaging with you as the craft person and the person who's giving them the advice on what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing.
Yep.
And it's giving you direct feedback if you're able to see, and this is a question, is this giving 100%. You direct feedback as a roaster? That when you start to connect with the end consumer through a roasting program that is retail, that's giving you important information, right?
Yeah, 100%. Because what it tells you everything about how you communicate, whether it be, because the thing I love about retail I'm a browser. So when I retail shop, I want to be able to step back and make a decision, just by looking. It's the same when you walk into a cafe, and I want to be able to walk in and I want to know, okay, they've got 3 grinders. Great. What's in those grinders?
Yeah.
I want to see, something, a sign on that saying, this is the blend, this is a single, and this is a, another showcase, whatever it is. So then I can say, great, can I have an espresso with blah, blah, blah. With retail, the same, it's the way that you, package. Obviously, that's where the psychology of packaging and labeling and everything comes into play. But it's also a great test for me about working with the cafe team and the baristas and even the floor team. Like, everyone forgets about the floor team, because they're the ones that get the questions. I want to buy some coffee. What do you recommend?
Yeah.
I can't really ask the barista right now. They're really busy. But I think maybe, so on your retail shelves, you need to have things like, this is suitable for,
right, whether it's a digital retail shelf or a physical retail shelf,
all that kind of stuff. So in terms of like the on flow of communication, does the team have the right amount of information to be able to talk to the customer? And then if they don't have that information, how do they get more? And they know they can walk into the roastery and get help. But also seeing how quickly or slowly the bags move, off the shelf as well, also indicates to me in terms of preference. So of course, kind of to contradict myself, but I actually realized that, like with the curve that we watched, like my style is this sugar dark milk based, because 95% of our market is milk based. So
cappuccino with 2 sugars.
Yeah. So we've got to consider the extractions, as well. So we need to make sure that this product has the ability to be flexible enough to go through a range of extractions, but it's mostly prioritized for the cafe in terms of what they want to do with their extractions.
Yep.
But you also see how it suits the retail market as well, and that's always the product that moves, first. And the singles, because they're roasted a little bit lighter, because they're more geared towards the tasters.
Yeah.
The blenders, the drinkers, the chuggable, chuggable,
16
simple, just get it in
cappuccinos
me.
a day.
Yeah. And, the other one is the drinkers. And I think it highlights maybe again, whether it's country specific, region specific in terms of, the amount of drinkers, tasters that are coming to, get your product. And so we have a really decent turnover on the, on the single side of things as well. But you have a lot of people using a lot of range of, brewing equipment at home. I mean, almost everybody here has an espresso machine, but I would say the next thing would either be a stovetop French press and then AeroPress, pour over, kind of go from there. Not so much, not a lot of drip, but there is, a little, it is starting to, come out a bit more. But in terms of, it's just really fascinating then seeing the trend on how the product moves.
So we have a bazillion more questions and we have completely run out of time, with regards to the question session.
Yep.
What we're going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break, give you a minute to take a sip of water and do all of that. And then we're going to come back with our third hour, which is a conversation between you and Stephen Green, the lovely Stephen Green from Mill City Roasters. I can't wait for this conversation. I'm super pumped. We'll come back and have that conversation. And in the break, if people want to go and register for Anne's mastermind groups, we'll put the link in the chat so that you can go over and check that out. And we'll see you guys in 7 to 10 minutes. Bye, guys. Welcome back to the reality of roasting, everyone. We are headed into session 3, and I'm super excited to announce our third presenter for today. And it's at this point that I want to give a massive shout out to Mill City Roasters and introduce you to Stephen Green, the CEO of Mill City. Hi, Stephen.
Jazz hands.
And Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah.
This is not Hawaiian. This is something else. I don't know what.
We can go with whichever. I'm going to be as PC and not racist as possible. And if I came off as being racist, I apologize because I called that shirt a Hawaiian shirt. You never know these days. You can get into a lot of trouble by just saying things like, let's go for Asian food. Anyway, so Stephen Green, before we do get started, I just want to say, because of you, we're able to offer today's sessions for free. And it is, I picked up the phone when we had decided that we couldn't go to Portland and do SCA and said to you, hey, listen, do you still want to support this event? We're going to do it online. And you didn't hesitate. So thank you, sir. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, very much so.
Thanks for doing all the work.
You're welcome. So, we are going to have a chat today about an article and some work that Anne has worked on with Rob Hoos. Again, shout out to Rob. So how we're going to structure this session is that I'm going to, as the least experienced roaster in the room, I'm going to explain to people what the article is and what I understood from it. And then what's going to happen from there is Anne's going to tell me if I completely cocked it up or I got it right. And she's going to fill in the gaps. And that's another Australian term. And then we're going to take the discussion from there, because we have the person who co-wrote the article about, roasters and roasting machines, and we have a roasting machine manufacturer here. So let's dive into it. So
yeah,
Sure.
The article was called "Can You Taste the Roasting System?" and it was published in Roast magazine. Exactly when was it published in Roast?
it was in the May-June issue last year.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. And and so the article makes a preface. The preface is that as an industry, we assume that it's the roasting machine that determines how a coffee is going to come out, not the roaster and the roasting profile. So I think the specific quote was that there's a the differences in taste are derived from different placement, thickness, and types of thermocouples, as well as differences in terms of the heat transfer controls. Theoretically, a bean, and this is what our industry thinks, theoretically, the bean is more influenced by the roasting machine than it is by the roast profile and the roasting style of the operator. And the article was focused on the idea, or the research that you and Rob had done was focused on the idea of figuring out, well, is that true or not? It wasn't about proving it wrong. It wasn't about proving it right. It was in the proper scientific way of doing things. Let's test the hypothesis.
Yeah.
And am I doing okay so far?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. So that's the basic preface of what we wanted to understand or what you guys wanted to understand in the article. And you used the idea of you used triangulation as your mechanism for testing your hypothesis. And so taste was the primary driver behind how you tested whether your hypothesis was correct. And your method was based on a number of assumptions. And the assumption was that in the triangulation, and I'll get you to talk about some definitions in a minute, but in the triangulation, there was the three different roasts that you were tasting. All of them had the following constants of variables. So in each of the roasts, they ended with the same bean and ground color. They matched time at yellowing. The time of first crack was equal between all of them. And the end of DTR, or development time ratio, was the same for all of them. And the idea was that if you roasted with all of those things as close to the same as possible, if you roasted those things on three different machines, if you roasted the same coffee on three different machines with those three variables that are constant, you wanted to test if people in a blind triangulation could pick the difference.
Correct.
How did I do?
Excellent.
Pretty solid.
Great.
Nice job.
Thank you.
It was an extremely well-written article, though. So
it really was.
Your comprehension is like super low-hanging fruit.
It was such a well-written.
I'm just teasing.
But you're right. That was the great thing about the way it was written. Like your presenting style, it was engaging, but it didn't make me feel dumb as somebody who hasn't ever roasted anything before. And I got to tell you, your findings were fascinating.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess for Rob and myself, some of the main reasoning behind it is, as consultants, we get asked all the time, what's the best machine? And so naturally roasters, when they're wanting to explore, what machine do they want to buy, the natural thing is to get either coffee from, different roasters because they know they're roasting on a specific machine, or even do their own test in terms of if they've got the opportunity to get the same coffee and roast it on different machines. But for those that did that exercise, I don't think they thought it through in terms of how best to match and, really using the profile as the thing that influences flavor, not the machine. And that's where, Rob is fantastic in the sense of I really learnt such amazing lessons working with him in the sense of the whole premise behind Prove It. I'll never forget the moment he just looked at me when we were talking about this topic and saying, man, I get asked all the time about bloody machines. How do I answer this really well, and how do we go about proving that, it's not necessarily the machine? We want roasters to pull their socks up and own up to, how they get to know their machine and how they're roasting and understanding their flavors, and stop blaming, the machine and the green and everything else. Like they've got to look at themselves. But essentially, I'll never forget him looking at me and going, well, we have to prove it. And I'm just like, do you know how huge that's going to be?
Well,
and he's like, well, yes. And that's why it took us like almost 3 years to get all of that. It started in 2017, and then the lead up to the article, and then it's kind of ongoing, where I've now just tapped in, which I'm going to reveal today, is some really cool scientific analysis, where we did particle size analysis, in terms of showing how if you cook the coffee the same with the same profile, technically then the beans are like cooked the same, and then when they're ground, they're going to chop the same and extract the same. So
yeah, wow.
we've done some really cool scientific, sort of backup from that as well. But yeah, just I can't thank Rob enough for his experience and guidance in that whole premise of doing research.
Yes.
And especially in roasting, where there's just so many different variables to consider. It's about just do your due diligence, collect your data, and know where to direct that data. And so, the first time we did it, it was really hard. The first round of experiments were,
that was at Firestarter, right?
Yeah. So, and we naturally chose the machines that are considered quite opposite, in the sense of we did Diedrich, Loring, and Probat, in terms of, they're different enough systems, and they have enough what I call community claims or myths about them, that if you use this roaster, you'll get this particular flavor. Right. And we're kind of like, well,
I can see Steve's ears.
Yeah, and which is great. And this is where we had to be, very respectful and very professional in dealing with, the manufacturers, and how we're dealing with talking about their machines, because essentially, as I've said, we're kind of blowing up some marketing material for these manufacturers. But the way that we sort of went about trying to talk about it, and talking about how it's great information for the manufacturers, our findings. But again, I will always be the first one to be tough on the roasters, the people themselves. I will always be the one to say, you've got to get to know this machine. You've got to understand it, and you've got to understand your own style and preference. But yeah,
I just want to say something at that exact point, because my big takeaway from this article, and I wrote it down, this information, and this information being the article, forces people to understand what they're doing. And it reveals to people that, well, it reveals to the industry, when you force people to accept this, that a lot of people don't actually understand the technical aspect of what they're doing. And that makes people uncomfortable, right? So what we're trying to do with particularly the mastermind groups with you is say, hey, listen, like, you don't have to admit to people you don't know what the fuck you're doing. We're going to teach you, right?
And I think because roasting, And this is where it's amazing, like with like all the videos that you guys do,
Your
Steve,
city's doing,
Your
yeah.
City, like just phenomenal, because as an industry, people are always looking for the way. What is just tell me the way. And as
Right.
we know, there's
No, the way.
it's no, like it's hard to say. Like one of the questions that we got in the Q&A was like, is there a standard way of roasting? I'm kind of like, initially I kind of just went, oh, like no. But then it's like, well, when you get to know your machine, there becomes a standard way on how you move through your roast. But yeah, in general though, it's such a dynamic industry because
Right.
there's just so much to consider. But there is a way to strip away all the crap and really simplify it and give yourself a chance to enjoy it and focus on it. And that's where in the sense of saying as simply as like trying to show that it's the profile that influences flavor, not necessarily the machine, and start with the triangulations and the tasting.
So let's take before we bring Steve in, I just want to kind of talk about what the results were that you got. And the results, as you said, you had 3 machines from 3 different manufacturers. You used a Probat UG15 from Proud Mary's. You used a Loring and S35 and used a Dietrich IR5. The Loring was with Padre Coffee and the Dietrich was at Veneziano. And this was at Firestarter.
Yeah.
Right. And so then, go ahead.
I was going to say then from year to year, we then
brought on more machines
start
into
bringing
the whole
different
thing.
machines.
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
So from the 529 triangulations, you had 27 testers on the first day, 39 on the second day. So it's not like you had 4 people that were responsible for all of these triangulations. From the 529 triangulations that were tasted, 163 were correctly identified, which comes to 31%. And you draw another interesting correlation in the article that 31% became comparable as the sample size grew to 1,689 triangulations. That number was around 29. Well, it was exactly 29.54%, which was not much of a deviation. But the other correlation that you drew, which was fascinating to me, was the probability of people guessing in a triangulation is 33.3%. And when you take that into consideration, you can't discount that when you're looking at these numbers. And it just really does create the basis for a fascinating discussion. And this is where you turn around and say, well, where's the relationship now sit between personal responsibility and manufacturer input when it comes to roasting, right?
Yep.
And this is where I want to bring Steve in to join the discussion.
Yep.
And Steve, I guess I'd love to start by asking you, provided and you agree that everything that I've said does anything need correcting of what I said?
No, and I think maybe 100%. Let's chat with Steve, and maybe towards the end,
you can bring in some new data.
Just for the viewers, just to kind of like show. It's just we can just visually see the data, like what we mean. Yeah, okay. I think that'd be great. But this is definitely. Let's go to Steve.
Let's go to Steve. So Steve, I'd love to start with you by saying, by asking you, what was your impressions of the article? I know that you think it was well written, but what are your thoughts about the article and the research?
Well, for me personally, it confirmed what my suspicion all along. I've been screwing around with coffee for 10, 11, 12 years and cycled through a seemingly endless succession of machines, some of which I built myself, some of which I designed myself. But I've been elbows deep in roasters from every single manufacturer. Mm-hmm. And to sum it up, what I probably would have made the title of your article is Control Tastes Good.
All right.
right? I think your findings kind of speak more to the, and I don't want to be negative about this. I don't mean it to be negative, but the truth is, you say 31% was almost identical to a random selection. Well, the truth is, it was a random selection because nobody can taste the difference between a machine in the first place. I mean, you start with some assumptions, and one of the problems in the industry is that, you have your ProBat roaster behind you, and you've been roasting on it for a number of years, and you've probably spent 10,000 hours at it, and you figured out how to coax good coffee out of that machine. And if you are an average roastery, a single owner occupied roastery, or you're in your own local market and that's as far as you take it, that's all that you know.
Yes.
So
yep.
You don't get out and compare, and then you say, well, you can go to Roasters Guild and there's machines from all manufacturers, but that's not the way Roasters Guild works. Typically you're on a team and you're assigned a machine and you're lucky to roast on two. You actually have to make a real effort to get out and compare machines, and then it's the first time you've ever roasted on that machine. So whether your coffee turns out or not is a total crapshoot, right? So what I see is, as an industry, we're $100 billion a year plus thing, and the vast majority of people are still drinking stale commodity coffee as a delivery mechanism for caffeine. And, people are thriving in local markets serving fresh roasted commodity coffee as an improvement over the stale commodity coffee, right? And those people kind of feel like, hey, I figured this out. I'm making money. I'm a good roaster. Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I guess my point is that the experience of the average player in this industry is very much more excruciatingly limited than they understand. There's very, very few of us that have spent a lot of time on a lot of different machines, spent a lot of time with a lot of different coffees, spent a lot of time with a lot of different roast profiles. I actually understand. I'm not going to say that I'm a competent roaster. I know how the machinery works, and I know what happens in the seed. If you held a gun to my head, I can probably produce coffee that you want to pay to drink.
Well, in that shirt, sir, how could you not?
Exactly. That's right. But again, to be completely redundant, that we've got a real problem, and maybe it's not a problem. I mean, the way that I see this is I see it in terms of sustainability. So in a post COVID-19 world, when we are going to be receiving thousands of containers full of poorly processed coffee because they didn't have the boots on the ground to sort it, or it had to wait to get processed, the onus is going to be on us as professionals to figure out how to make use of that coffee. We can't just arbitrarily sort out the 60 or 70% of any given coffee to make it specialty, to make it palatable. We're going to have to figure that out. And if we're really concerned about sustainability in the industry, we're going to have to become better cuppers. We're going to have to become better roasters.
Yeah.
You highlight what Anne's talking about in her article, which is people need to get better equipped with an understanding of what they're doing and how to make the roaster execute on the ideas and the knowledge of what they're trying to produce. Would you both agree that that's what we would aspire to empowering people to do as an industry? Like that's where we need to be heading?
I mean, that's where I keep writing the checks. I'm actually putting my money where my heart is in this.
Yeah.
We are actively engaged and trying to help people do a better job at their machine, do a better job with their green selection, do a better job. Yep. You mentioned in your presentation the difference between pre-roast and post-roast blending. Blending is going to be a big deal this year. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a huge deal. And people need to, the folks that don't wrap their arms around that don't, kind of engage in that a little bit, they're going to be less successful.
Yep.
So,
what are your thoughts on all of that, Anne?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely highlighting. I just keep on having this vision of, because in relation to Steve, when he said in terms of when people get caught in their own bubble and they don't get a chance to try a different machine, or when they're learning how to roast, and it's highlighting that element of, how do I step up and make a decision? What do I know about roasting? It's
That's
highlighting
a great statement. What do I know about roasting?
About, and that's what I was saying. It's the running joke in the industry, but we're all doing it. We're turning beans brown. It's, how do you go from green to brown? So you step up to a different machine, you understand the control, how to control it, you understand the probe, what kind of data am I dealing with, you assign that data to your key events, and you just learn how to drive to get to each event. And I think that whole, I love the word control. I think that's really what, it's underlying it. It's all about that, and how we understand that. And like, especially like if you're in a situation where, and it did happen the first week of COVID, one of my clients, their roaster blew up. It just died. And so they're like,
wow,
I have to borrow your machine. I'm like, cool, no problem. And we just went through the whole stages. It was basically, can you taste the roasting system one on one, kind of like, and it was fascinating when I asked them the questions. I said, what do you know about tell me about your profile. Where do you want to, how do you want to drive yourself through that green to brown process? And it was really interesting seeing what they did and didn't understand, to help them feel relaxed about jumping onto a different machine, all that kind of stuff. But I think, control is the definitely the thing in terms of, understanding those machines and variables.
factors.
Yep.
So one of the other takeaways in your article was that that the science shows that the probability that somebody could taste the roasting machine in the triangulation was more probable that they could not than they could. And you make a comment in the article where what you say is that doesn't mean that all machines are created equal. It just means that in the marketing that manufacturers of roasting machines need to be doing is just building better quality machines that last longer, that have better customer service. Not all machines are necessarily created equal in that sense, but there are other things that manufacturers can do. So I'd love for you and Steve to kind of talk that kind of thing out.
Well, I think Steve's the best example, because that's where Mill City is nailing it in the sense of service, and that's genuinely true, in the sense that ultimately the ultimate outcome of the research was, buy the machine you want to buy, and just because you can only afford a certain level of machine doesn't mean you're going to produce a bad product. You just need to learn how to use that machine. But definitely with the manufacturers, there was definitely a call in the sense of, we would love, stronger relationships in terms of service, communication, backup.
Right.
Maybe more so for us down here in Australia, being so far away from, all the manufacturers, like trying to get in touch with Europe and US, like for this roaster where their machine blew up, but they had to get a part, sent from Europe. And I just went, oh, this is going to take forever to get here. We've got to deal with this. What do we do? And just trying to get through. I think definitely, definitely manufacturers are starting, I'm hoping, to realize, in terms of definitely from that servicing perspective, that's always the common question. When we're looking to buy a roaster, the common question is, who's your backup for service? And how does that happen? But definitely from the education perspective, I think who else besides Mill City is actively you know, posting, you know, such amazing content online about roasting. And I mean, if it wasn't, yeah, I think Steve, in terms of,
I mean,
let me
it's
speak to a couple things here,
sure.
because
yeah,
it is so. I'm going to tell you my perspective, and you can comment on this. What I've seen in my journeys thus far is that, number one, the vast majority of manufacturers of roasters don't actually really. They're almost more fabrication facilities. They're more welding shops, and they're good guys. It's hard to buy a bad roaster. Okay. There are some exceptions, but that I'm not going to name names.
Good.
But
we're not
I think,
that
but
place.
I think one of the things that happens is, you know, these machines are it's an old technology. You know, it's like, okay, we need a rotating drum and a heat source, and we need airflow, and we need a dryer, and then whatever the interpretation of whoever cobbled that system together. And listen, just to be real with you, I've been working in engineering for 35 years, and I know exactly. They took a young mechanical engineer with 3 or 4 years of experience because he's cheap, right? Mm-hmm. And they do a drawing and they make a thing, and he, you know, looks it up someplace and he thinks he knows what this is because it's simple, right? It's
and
just
he likes coffee.
Yeah. He's got a T-shirt, and you know they don't understand the process. They don't understand that, hey, you need a bunch of therms in the beginning of the roast because you've got a bunch of water in this seed, and somehow you have to impart heat to this batch without inducing heat defect, and then you need to throttle it back to slow it down after that, right? I mean, this is stuff that's instinctive to you and I. It is, you know, they don't know. So what happens is people on those systems end up gaming the physics of the machine to somehow get a better product, or they just fill it up full of coffee and let it cook away for 20 minutes and bag it up and ship it to the nearest gas station. And that's cool. I'm okay with that. Gas stations need coffee too, right? But I think the growth in the market is in quality. And, you know, we build the best machine we possibly can for the purpose of control. So having said that, the other issue is, you know, we talk about, you know, this 33% accuracy rate. One of the issues is, and this happens all the time, and this is going to bear witness to you, people will buy a system, and that system is, you know, probably most ideally suited to a specific sort of roast profile, right?
Yes.
Just in general, right?
Yep.
If it's got a rotational speed, a drum diameter, and the airflow characteristics and the heating characteristics, it will be most suited towards a sort of roast profile. Now, most people that buy that system, this is what happens to them. They put coffee in it, and it's lousy, and they don't buy that coffee. And they put a Colombian in it, and it's great. And guess what? Now we roast Colombian. It took me 7 years to figure this out. I was talking to a guy, and he says, it was something crazy, like we only roast, Haitian and coffee from, I don't know where the hell it was, Guatemala or something. He like 2 varieties of coffee. Yep. And I said, why do you do that? He's like, that's all that tastes good. Yep. And I'm thinking, okay, that's weird. Yep. Right. But I think that is a thing. And I think that these machines, you know, people don't listen. Thermocouples are new. You know, 5-6 years ago, you know, when I started, what I was doing was hot rodding ancient Probats and Primos, you know, for gas control, and putting a bean temperature thermocouple in because somebody, you know, wanted to be pals, and I was the only person they knew that could change a tire. So I got stuck working on their machine, right? That's how I got involved in coffee originally, right? Semi-professionally. So this is a new thing. And it's that data and the understanding. And then okay, there's one last thing I'm going to dump on you, and I'm sorry here, but you know, one of the things is when I started 10, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, you could not get a straight answer from anybody about anything related to roasting,
That's
right?
such a great point.
And it wasn't because they were jerks.
They didn't know.
It was because they didn't know, right? And nobody wanted to admit that the emperor had no clothes.
Oh,
So the reason that we do the YouTube stuff, the reason I wrote you a check to do this thing is because I think that better coffee generates demand for more better coffee.
Right.
And I think that allows me to build better roasters and sell more of them.
Well, the three of us are aligned on that kind of thing. It's like we've seen that there's a gap. We realize that people are scared to admit that they don't understand what they don't know.
Sure.
And we want to give them the opportunity to learn what they don't know in a way that keeps their dignity. You know, how can we help them get access to the information without them having to cop to the fact and step into that vulnerability in a way that they're probably going to feel ashamed of, because come tomorrow and you'll understand why shame's a terrible thing.
Because it's so simple at the end of the day, really. It
is.
And
Go ahead,
I'm
Anne.
never wearing the shirt again for sure.
Why?
Oh, no.
I think it's great.
I'm just teasing. I was shamed.
But you raise it's at the core of why we wanted to do this 3-day thing, right? Because this is an opportunity for us to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, listen, what's happened is that COVID's broken everything. And a lot of the questions that came through were people saying, is everything going to go back to normal? When's it going to go back to normal? Are our wholesale accounts going to be fine after this? Are we going to get all our business back? Can we just go back to roasting the way that we like, one version of all of that kind of stuff? Friends, if you're listening and you're waiting for that date, like when's the governor of your state or the minister of your state going to turn around and say, when's this all going back to normal? It's not happening. It's not happening. We are in a new normal, and the time ahead of us will evolve. But our industry has changed permanently, and let me help you understand why. Cafes were running at an average of 3 to 6% net profit if they were doing well. Now, if cafes are running at such slim margins and the majority of that revenue that they're earning is being eaten up by fixed costs, what happens is whether they do the business or not, they're going to get swallowed up by this. But then people come out and say, well, all right, we're going to come back to some sort of normal. For the foreseeable future, though, you're only going to be allowed to run at somewhere around 20% of what you were running before. Now, if you were running at 100% capacity and you were making 3 to 6% net profit, and the majority of that was eaten up by fixed costs, and you've cut that down to 20%, you've already been in a situation where you've been running at way less than 20%, almost nothing during this, the time that we've all been closed, and you're close to having to close shop. Now you're being told that indefinitely you're going to have to run at 20%. Not going to happen. Like it's broken. It's permanently broken. A new model has to emerge from this moment on. And you've got to adapt as quickly as possible in the most intelligent way that you can, which is why we decided to say, let's do this. Let's give people the opportunity to be better professionals. And the way that we do that is by empowering them with copying to what they don't know, by just showing up and listening to these incredible speakers, and being able to inhale that knowledge and then move forward more intelligently in their decision making. That's the strategy behind this.
Can I just say that?
Please do.
I think that there's a micro and there's a macro to this.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
So the world is different today than it was 6 months from now. And it'll be different 6 months from now than it is today.
Right.
And people are going to make small scale decisions, for their own lives and their career, their profession. One of the things is, one of the places where we've thrived and the thing that the need that we've met is this. There's coffee has traditionally been an entry level position. It's a low barrier to entry. I'm going to be a barista. I'm going to be a front end counter person. Somebody's going to show me how to pull a shot. I wish somebody would teach me how to do latte art. I have no skill with that.
It's fine. You've got your shirt.
That's true. Lauren keeps telling me she will, but I never find time. So,
by the way, someone in the chat has the yellow version of your shirt. Shout out to Jethro, and they wanted us to know that.
Tommy Bahama forever. So, I guess where I'm going with this is, people, this entry level thing, if somebody's super jazzed about coffee and loves the culture and loves that it's a sensory driven thing and is super excited about it, the only way for them to make adult professional money has been to start their own thing. Right?
The barrier to entry is still low for that as well, because you don't have to know anything to do that either. You just have to have some capital.
Well, but that's the thing, most people start on a shoestring and, they start in their garage or they cobble together equipment and they find a lease, and the reason that I wanted to do this as a company was because I wanted to help those people make decisions that maximize their freedom of choice.
Yeah.
And I think we're coming into that again. I think there's a lot of people out there who just discovered that their security is not in that weekly paycheck, or they've discovered that life is too short and they're looking to self-actualize and do something for themselves. And they love coffee and they love coffee culture. They love coffee people because we're super lovable, right? And
we hope so.
Well, you are, for sure. I don't like anybody, and I like all of you. So there. So, I guess where I'm going with this is we want to teach them to do better, to distinguish themselves in the market with a higher standard of excellence all the way across the board. And the other thing I want to tell you too is, and I just want to put this out into the world, for anybody who I haven't put to sleep already, droning on endlessly.
No, you're doing great.
Win, lose, or draw, something's going to happen tomorrow. If you go out of business today, no sweat.
Yeah.
There's always going to be another Monday. The sun's going to come up. There's going to be opportunity. One of the number one reason that I wanted to do this as a business was because I felt like, when I started my first company back in the 80s, right, it was enormously easier. It was less complex. There were less challenges. There was, you'd hang a shingle up and start taking money in and hope the tax guys didn't catch on for a couple of years. That's what we did. And now everything's super complex and it's really hard and there's so much competition. And what I wanted to do was kind of equip people to young people especially, to prosper in business, to learn their craft, to learn to manage commercial relationships, to learn to, and it doesn't mean succeeding, because failure, a test only shows you what you don't know. So it's okay to fail. It's
important to fail. It's important to fail so that you can learn how to recover as a part of business.
I'm super good at failure.
Me too. But I've been able to be successful at a couple of things too. So it keeps you motivated, right? But you have to learn how to fail, and you have to learn how to make mistakes.
This goes back to the roastery too, and I know that you'll agree with this. The only way to learn to roast great coffee is to roast a bunch of crappy coffee.
Yep.
And with regards to tasting the roasting system, so there are a couple things that we should mention.
Go ahead.
So people, one place where this data has kind of gone off the rails a little bit is people think that they can roast coffee on popcorn poppers, that you can't taste the roasting system. Whoops. And, like this whole little cottage industry of super sciencey home roasters that think they're going to master roasting. Well, I'm sorry, dudes. You got to roast we're talking 10,000 hours to mastery. right? I mean, just stop and think about that for a second.
What, you can't be a master roaster after 6 months? Really?
Well, I mean, not unless you're doing 1,000,000 pounds a week, maybe,
I was clearly being sarcastic. The number of people that register for stuff or they'll introduce themselves through email and tell me that they're a master roaster and they've been doing it for 18 months.
Yeah.
Or they know everything about coffee. I'm like, I've been doing this nearly 20 years and I don't think I know anything about coffee. And I know a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, and that's like the wild card, right? I mean, like what I tell people all the time, and I'll cop to this. What I tell people is basically, for all practical intents and purposes, we've built a slightly better hammer, right? And what we really want to do is teach people how to swing the hammer.
Right.
And the hard part of roasting is not the machinery. Usually, there are exceptions, but it's the coffee. The coffee is a super wild card. Every time you put something in the drum, it's a little different.
Yep.
You know, and I think your work is super good and super valid, but I do think, like everything else online, it's been taken out of context. People are like, "Oh, this is I've mastered this. This is the best coffee I ever had." Well, maybe it is, but it's not the best coffee we've ever had.
Can I just say something there that we need to put out there? We haven't put it out there in this conversation, and we've all three of us in separate discussions I've had with you have mentioned this. The idea of naming something as good coffee or not good coffee. Taste is subjective. So what I think is good, you, again, I think tastes terrible. I had a friend who was a very well-renowned coffee person in the industry. And every time we went somewhere to drink coffee together all over the world, we had very, very different ideas of what good coffee tasted like and what good coffee did not taste like. Mm-hmm. And that's just because we had different preferences in what we liked. I really like natural coffees, provided that they're roasted a certain way. But I have a tendency towards natural coffees, and this person despises natural coffees. It's one of those things where we need to get the message out there. You're allowed to like whatever the fuck you like. Just understand why you like it. Understand how to achieve what you think is a good roast.
Let me tell you a funny story about this. And I learned this. I actually, the SCA system taught me something. When I learned it, you do the greens grading, right? You're at the cupping table and you're grading greens. You're kind of supposed to approach that green in the most favorable mindset possible, right? And I went, okay, I got that right on the test and we're golden. So like a couple of years later, when I brought Derek in, and Derek is a genius in all things culinary. He was trained as an executive chef at a professional culinary school, won awards. He won the Mustard Festival one year, believe it or not. You ever run into that up in Napa Valley? Yeah, he's a big deal, right?
Okay, I believe you. He's working for you. Well,
I'm a ruthless harvester of talent. And by the way, if you are planning on moving to Minnesota, let me know. So here's the story. So we're shorthanded one day and we're unloading containers, and Derek, besides all of his other multitudinous talents, really drives a forklift great, right? He's like a professional forklift guy. So I've got him over at the warehouse and we're unloading containers. It's like 100 degrees and it's container after container after container. And it's like 3:00 in the afternoon. They haven't had a break all day. And I go over to Burger King and I buy hamburgers for the guys just to get them something, right? Mm-hmm. And I pass them out and I'm thinking in the back of my head, I'm like, oh God, Derek's going to be like, hamburger, right? This is what he does. He unwraps it, he takes a bite, and he looks at me and he says, this tomato is really fresh, right? Now, he does this. He's really taught me this, really. So we talk about preference, like, dislike. Derek rigorously finds the value in every single cup, every single roast, every single seed. He'll key in and identify, and he'll speak to it. He'll say, you know what, this has got good caramelization. You know what, this has got pretty good body, right? He's relentlessly positive about every single coffee, every single cup, every single roast. He always finds that thing that he wants to bring forward and accentuate and make part of that thing. And I think that's the difference between amateur and professional coffee. I think he's a consummate professional culinary artist, and he brings that to coffee.
And I have met a couple of people like that, and I find drinking coffee with them I can't wait to have a coffee with Derek, but I find them eternally frustrating if I'm having a coffee with them and they want to sit there and argue with me about the fact that I'm drinking a coffee that I don't like.
No.
And no, but what my point with that, you know what I'm saying? It's that it's a wonderful perspective. I'm not sitting there disliking a coffee because I want to dislike it. And it's not that I can't find the great in it. It's that what I would love to see happen is people come at coffee with a balanced approach. So most people will just say, I like it or I hate it. And that's a great place to start. But what we want is people that say, I really like the caramelization in this cup. But what I think it's lacking is I can taste that it's vegetal. And I understand that that's probably an underdeveloped coffee because it's vegetal. And I think that when I roast it next time, I could probably develop that more. And while I think it's wonderful to have people who can find the positive, like find something you can like in every cup, but have the balanced side of that of not necessarily criticizing the cup, but being analytical about understanding what it is that you can approach. In our team at Mapper Forward, we're always about, we're going to celebrate what we do well, but how we also have to identify how we could do it better.
I think that's exactly right. I think that is really the place where you start to develop a sense of craft.
Right. And I think what Anne's doing is saying to people, and this is the kindest way I can put it. I think what Anne is saying, stop blaming your tools.
Well, sure. Quit blaming. Well, and I talk about this in my video. Quit blaming the roaster. Quit blaming the machinery. Quit blaming the green. Quit blaming the importer. Right. Quit blaming the extraction. Become a well-rounded professional and learn how to do all of these things competently, and good things are going to happen to you.
And understand what it is behind it. Go ahead, Anne.
And I think like you say, and I say the same thing. I loved how you said that roasting is cooking. And I know a lot of people don't like that analogy sometimes, but essentially that's what we're doing. And we're taking the beans through, a physical change in response to heat application. And as a result, there's a change in the structure of the coffee that's then related to flavor. So it's, practicing and knowing and tasting, and but it's then knowing how to back yourself up.
Right.
With I've tasted it, it tastes underdeveloped. How do I fix it?
Right.
It's that feedback loop back to how do I fix it, that can trick people up if they don't back themselves up with the right information and data.
Right. Yeah. And speaking about data, I don't know how this happened, but we've only got 5 minutes left.
Cool.
And you have some data that you want to tell us about.
Yeah, so I think as part of the research, I think it's also really important. I just, want to touch on as well. I do want to for the viewers in terms of the whole idea of the research, we weren't endorsing a particular profile. I want to make sure that was, really clear. We weren't telling people to roast, with this profile. We just had a control, and that control is what was driving what we had to match, basically. We just had to match the control. We had to learn how to drive the individual machines in order to then, get those profiles to match. Right. And then, of course, based on the triangulation, the idea was then to show by tasting, technically, because they've been taken through the same cooking process, that they technically should taste the same. And there shouldn't be, I mean, just because you use a Probat and then you jump on a Loring, you very different controls, very different design, you're naturally going to drive those machines incredibly differently to make the coffee reach the same points. And that's where people get mixed up and think that, you know, the way that you drive the machines is also going to have, you know, you're going to taste that. So we were coming at it from that, you know, perspective of it's been taken through the same physical changes at the same time, kind of thing. So yeah, testing it by tasting, but then I wanted to start tapping in more scientific analysis. So I got a science friend of mine who's part of the Australian Coffee Science Lab, Monica. And so we went to La Trobe University
in Melbourne.
And we went to the science department where we put the beans, the ones that we did in the triangulations, we put them under the microscope to sort of analyze and see structurally how do they look under the microscope. And then we used the exact same grind that we used for the triangulation and all of the color measurements. And we then put that, it was really cool. We had to go to the archaeology department
Nice.
and then do the particle analysis on the size of the, because we wanted to see, the idea was that, well, if they've been cooked the same with the same profile, are they chopping the same? I mean, we're thinking we're using the same grind setting, but then are they chopping the same, and will they show that also under the under analysis as well? So she has the ability to do that. This really amazing bit of equipment where it goes past a laser, and that laser is then basically analyzing the size, and it just takes an average of all of the readings and maps out the way that they're reading. So the research is really quite promising in that it is essentially confirming that they're showing the same or similar in the particle size analysis.
Wow.
So it's just nice to have some scientific confirmation in the sense and I'm coming at it from that cooking perspective. For me, it's about, I've taken the beans through a similar heat and a similar reaction at the same time. So it doesn't matter that it's on, you know, Mill City, Probat, Loring, Diedrich, whatever. Yes, it's different because of the way that we get there, the way that we have to control the machines, but technically the beans are going through the same physical change.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we show that? Yeah. So, and again, it's really about, again, making roasters just pull their socks up and really own up to understanding everything that they need to do with their roasting and backing themselves up with the right information.
Are you going to be releasing an article on that?
Well, that was the idea. And again, like this is all, you know, still work in progress. The idea was to do another release either through Roast Mag or through their online platform, as well as talk about it in Portland.
Yeah, great.
When we do the SCA, because we do
in
the
25
workshop.
years from now.
Yeah. So we've been sitting on this since last year. This scientific, because we wanted to release it. When we did the workshop at Expo.
Well, thanks for telling everyone here about it. That's exciting.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you, and thank you to Rob if he's still watching, in terms of you know, allowing me to talk about it and sort of say, hey, you know, this is another element to how we're trying to show, you know, the premise behind the research, and yeah.
Oh, awesome.
So it's quite exciting.
Awesome.
Have you played around with? We've done this. Have you played around with hand grinding?
No. So
you will find that if you hand grind, you will notice immediately a correlation between outer and inner bean color and the amount of force. And it's interesting because it's a tactile. Cool. It's an immediately tactile thing. You can tell how.
Yeah, that's
how
cool.
Fragile the seed has become.
That's so cool you brought that up, because The next part of the science, we had to get approval to get access to the equipment, was pressure testing the bean. So we kind of like similar premise with the hand grinding, is that we can then get access to, so basically, yeah, at what point are the beans, reacting to the pressure? When do they
Is that a
become brittle?
density thing?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
It is. It's a density thing. It's also when you grind. We talk about roasting for solubility.
Yep.
Right. And we've kind of played around with roast profiles that maximize solubility without crossing over into roast flavor. Right. So we're talking light roasted coffees with maximum solubility.
Yep.
And one of the things that we're measuring inner and outer bean color, and it's just something we played around with, is actually running a hand grinder, and you can immediately feel the difference.
I imagine.
That's really cool.
No, I don't know how it's not a thing you can record. I guess maybe you could put a force, you could do that, but I think that there's a super sciencey aspect to this, where people have this childlike idea that, oh, we're gonna figure this out and every cup is gonna be perfect, and I don't think that's real.
No.
And I'll tell you the number one reason. Just for instance, nobody I know that's doing high quality specialty coffee is using automation in any way, shape, or form. And the reason they're not doing that is because there is no technology to gauge the amount of latent heat contained within the roasting system. There's no way to do that. There's at least nobody I know has figured out a way to do that. So the standard deviation of event times to temperature is all over the map for automation, because every time you start a batch, you've got a subtly different amount of latent energy in the system. There's overshoot and undershoot. And that can't be measured. It can only be observed as to what is happening to the seed. I can't see the heat, but I can see what it does in the dryer.
Yep.
I can smell it. I can see it. So this is, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not a hater.
You're wearing a shirt like that. You can't be a hater.
Right?
Right?
But, this is just, it's stuff to play with.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Absolutely.
I could see the intuitive aspect of hand grinding your own coffee will give you an extra bit of information that, having, if you do it consistently and enough times.
Maybe, I know we have to go, but I'll just say this. At the end of the day, I have faith and I trust in people's innate abilities to master the tool. And I don't think it's an intellectual thing. I think it's like driving a car or riding a bike. I think it's got to become intuitive, and you start to feel it.
Yep.
And until you're at that level where you know that you are feeling the thing, the first time that I knew that I had that, we went to Roasters Guild retreat, and somebody was running a 2K, and I was watching, and I kept reaching over to turn their drum speed or their airflow, because I could tell from the sound of the roaster that they were running their drum speed way too low. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm sorry, I need to back off. You need to screw this up so you understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But I do.
I think the car analogy is perfect. In terms of like being spatially aware. I was going to talk about. Sorry, I know we're going over time, but I was going to say in my presentation, I forgot that analogy of, it's like when you get into a rental, the first thing you do is you set yourself up, you work out, spatially how you feel in the car, you get your seat all comfy, you work out where your indicators and your lights are, all that kind of stuff. And it's the same when you step up to a roaster. You've got to learn how to control that machine the same way you need to learn how to control that different car. And you're still going to follow a similar roadmap. You're just going to maybe potentially drive it differently because of the car that you're driving.
Right.
That kind of thing. So,
yeah. Well, thank you so much to both of you for showing up to this conversation. It was enlightening. And I have a lot of respect for both of you. Thanks for doing this, and in so much gratitude to you. And for anyone who's watching, if you would like to join the mastermind groups, head to mapitforward.org/group coaching. If you want to join Anne's mastermind groups, the places have already started filling up, so make sure that you do join them. Also, show us some love by subscribing to this YouTube channel, please. We are trying to hit 1,000 subscribers, so we'd love some help doing that. We have posted links for Mill City's website and Instagram, as well as the YouTube channel. Please check it out.
Absolutely.
And Anne's website is eqmr.com.au. Please go check it out. And we are about to end the broadcast. There will be a video. We are making a bit of an announcement after this, so please do check that out too. Anne, you're amazing. Thank you so much for all your time and preparation in this. The link to your article is in the show notes below. We can't wait to see all the cool shit that you've got coming up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Steve, thank you to you for doing what you do and being open to letting us continue to do this, even though COVID kind of screwed the thoughts up. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Hi, friends. Coffee-focused small businesses around the world have been impacted immensely due to the shutdowns that have resulted from the coronavirus pandemic. From coffee producers to roasters to cafe owners and the workforces that are associated with those businesses, the whole value chain has been devastated. Coffee for the Frontline is an initiative that is focused on stimulating coffee small businesses worldwide, while also giving the general public the chance to thank and support frontline workers that have been instrumental during the coronavirus pandemic. Here's how it works. A member of the general public finds a coffee small business that's registered with the program, either on social media or by searching our website. They then purchase a gift card through that small business's online store. The small business connects the person who's purchased the gift card with a registered frontline worker, who then goes and redeems the gift card directly on that small business's website. Hello again. Coffee for the Frontline is a program that was developed by Map It Forward to stimulate small businesses in the coffee industry during the coronavirus pandemic. Here's the basics of how the program works. You register to be a part of the Coffee for the Frontline program and get assigned a landing page that allows frontline workers to register and sends new customers to your website, where they'll purchase a gift card that you've created specifically for this program. Once a customer purchases a gift card, you'll email them details about the frontline worker from the data we've provided you with. That customer then forwards their gift card onto the frontline worker, who will go and redeem it on your website. The marketing ROI to you is extensive, and the program has been put together so that the benefits to everybody involved are endless. Customers feel great because they've helped to keep you in business and a frontline worker caffeinated. Frontline workers feel supported through the gratitude of a stranger, and your coffee small business gets to fight another day with dignity. All with the added benefit that new connections are being made along the way.